Oh, you're even further over than you were before.
Okay, are you guys ready? Are you guys ready? If we could all please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would like to welcome everyone to our fiscal year 2020 budget presentation. The way we are going to conduct this evening, just the flow of information, we will start off with the presentation by Dr. McCursey and the administration. We will then have public comment by anyone who wishes to speak. What we do ask is over on the table where we have the documents for this evening's presentation, there is a sign-up sheet on that table. If anyone wishes to speak, if you could please sign up. That'll just help us determine time allotment, but we will have public comment after the presentation. And then we will proceed with Board of Education questions concerning the budget. We do have 2 other meetings currently scheduled to continue the budget process. We have Tuesday the 22nd at 6 p.m. start, and then Thursday the 24th. Depending on how Q&A goes, we may need to adjust, but that is the plan for now. So with that, Dr. McCursey, I will turn the evening over to you.
Well, good evening, Board of Education. Very pleased to present formally to you and to the community the budget recommended for FY 2020. You as a board have actually had this document since roughly the 4th of this month. On the 9th, we had a very productive 4-hour workshop. So this is another way for us as an administration to reinforce a set of the materials in this budget. What I want to do first is just remind us all of the schedule. It is an intensive month worth of work with you all voting next Thursday the 24th on this budget. As I mentioned, the process publicly started with you on the 9th. We're here in the formal presentation tonight. We'll then move Tuesday night from 6 to 7:30 ahead of the regular board meeting for more discussion and work with you as a board. And then also on the 22nd, if need be, my hunch is you will want that time, the 24th. And then as the chair has said, there is public comment at each of those meetings for you as a board to hear public comment. You see the rest of the schedule beyond the Board of Education process as it moves through the Board of Selectmen, the budget, the Board of Finance, potentially 2 sessions, and then it moves in a town-wide set of decisions with ultimately, as of May 4th, the vote town-wide on this budget. I want to stress that this budget is based, as it should be, on the district's strategic outcome, which is producing global citizens. To me, very simply put, that means we want our graduates to go out and be people using their minds with rigor, but also having big hearts, compassion, blending that sense of a rigorous intellectual approach to things, but also blending it with a caring and compassion. We're putting those 2 things together. We have 5 goals, as you know, board. We've worked on those with you that drive us towards that outcome. Being very explicit about academic excellence, being explicit about a healthy learning environment, not just worrying about our rigor academically, but that we're a district that stands for the well-being of all our students and staff. Digital learning is a 3rd goal. Let me stress that is a goal towards our outcome of blending digital learning in. Digital learning to support what we're doing, not to overtake what we're doing or to be the sole way to be there for learning, but as a supportive, blended approach. Gauging district progress is the 4th. It's that idea that we care about outcomes, we care about results, we care about progress, process. As many of you have heard me say repeatedly, anyone who's dealt with young children, either in your own family or in classrooms, or old children, adults, know that no one point in time captures you, no one measurement captures you, no one test captures you. It's a multiple set of measures, and then it's change over time, growth. Lastly, we set out resources for learning as a goal. That is both the financial resources that are brought to us by the town, but also the time and treasure that we get through the PTO, through WEF, through others, that we bring together all the possible resources to maximize what we're doing. On our website, you see that image, and it's an interactive image. You can go click on all of those elements in that image, and it goes into very specifically the definition for each of those areas and this year's action plans, which, as you'd hope, we're updating year to year. Want to start that we are a district with lots of wins, lots of victories, lots of successes. And the administrative team has been updating this, and this is sort of the fresh look. First, if you think about academic excellence, and there are a variety of ways, a variety of things to look at, all the way from our great success at our graduates, some 99% going on to college. We're a college preparatory town. We're a town where families come here, they're in our schools to go off to four-year institutions. Other districts in the area may not be so focused on that. We are. It is increasingly important now, and if you're in the higher ed conversation at all, one of the things that higher ed is worried about is, are the students coming in graduating? So it's very important. It's a real outcome to worry about. Students coming into college, at what rate are they graduating? We're very proud to say the class of 2012, class of 2013, graduated from college in 5 years at a rate of 100% and then 99%. The area benchmark for that is about 85%. The national benchmark for that is about 50%. We know that 30% of college freshmen across the country drop out at Thanksgiving, freshmen. So for us to be at that kind of success rate is very important. That is a real significant number. At this point in my career, I've heard repeatedly people say, give me the number that explains education. And I've repeatedly said, there really is no one number. This actually gets close to it. Because inside that college going rate, but the college graduation rate within 5 years are all kinds of evidence that this district is really making a difference. You go across that chart, and I won't reread it all to you, but in the middle you talk about our writing center. We talk about our writing center. At the high school, trying to be there, providing extra intensive, rigorous support for our students with the written word that's critical across all disciplines. You move over to the right side, and the Odyssey of the Mind, state finalists at WIS. Come more into the middle, you see middle school accomplishments. We were a district with lots of wins academically. Digital learning and technology. It's blended in, it's supportive, but we also find places you see here through the robotics club, teams, that we are having success both within the district, but then when we go out to compete. Over on the far right really captures what the point of digital learning is in advanced districts such as Weston. That it's to differentiate, to bring personalization into what we're doing, and that there is focused on the second grade with the use of iPads. Fourth area is the arts, be it the visual arts, the performing arts, music, theater, all types. We value that in Weston. The resources of the town have allowed us to value that. And you see there both the within district success, but when we go out to compete or go out to compare our students to those statewide, regionally, and nationally, we do incredibly well. But most important to me is what we are doing here within the Weston schools. And you see that in terms of the South Pacific example, all the way over to the number of students at WIS singing and performing. To have that large number of 3rd through 5th graders that active musically is significant. And almost in the flow of a typical day at WIS. You go there and there's different celebrations with song and music. It's a vibrant part of who we are. Athletics, some 70 to 80% of our high school students are involved in athletics. We have a great range of teams. Our facilities are excellent. Mark Berkowitz, our athletic director, regionally, nationally active as a leader in athletics. You see the results here. Very high percent of our students participating. The academic results for our students is very important. That's in that 3rd column over. But we also, frankly, do very, very well when we get into state competitions. Not up there is a phrase I care about, which is winning with character. Win-loss records are one thing, but if you're doing that with character, with high regard for your teammates, high regard for your opponents, that's a big plus. So we are a district with big wins. We need to remember that as we grapple with this budget. Enrollment. When I left Greenwich and came to Weston to be superintendent, one of the words was, this is a district with the enrollment going off a cliff. Colleen Palmer, a good colleague, who I talk with a lot, one of her challenges was how to manage this sense that enrollment here was going to, again, go off that cliff. That's not the case. It is declining here. Enrollment data we are sharing with you as a board, we're sharing with the community, shows that our rate of decline, which is there, is typical of all of our area districts. Typically in Connecticut, it's the urban districts growing, more of the metropolitan districts, such as at Greenwich, staying flat or growing. Others are declining. We're declining at about 2% over the next 5 years. That's 49 students, 49. You do not make big, dramatic changes at that slight adjustment in enrollment. And you see that you've got a trough early, but that goes away, and at the high school level, that's where we'll see a bit of decline. But still, overall, over the next 5 years, only a drop projected of some 49 students. I'm now going to turn it to Rich, who will get us into the meat of the budget, and we'll step back up.
So as an administrative team, we carefully look to craft a budget that doesn't ask for a lot of new initiatives, new personnel, or new requests, understanding that this was going to be a difficult budget year. We understood for a number of years that the fiscal year 20 budget was going to be a budget larger than a lot of people would have liked to seen for a number of reasons, and we'll talk about that as we go throughout the PowerPoint. But as you can see from this graph right here, the overwhelming majority of the money that we're asking for are contractual obligations. If we look at non-personnel, non-contractual items, personnel changes, they're roughly flat. We also issued RFPs that generated about $100,000 in savings to largely offset those costs. When we bring it all together, the budget asks for $2.2 million or 4.32%. But of that 4.32%, it is essentially all contractual obligations. So how does the budget break down? Well, our contractual salary obligations are just over $850,000 or 1.66%. So if there were no other obligations throughout this budget, salary increases alone because of our collective bargaining agreements would represent a 1.66% budget increase. When factoring in health insurance, payroll taxes, and pension, we're at 3.08%. So that's no new initiatives, no new personnel, or anything else, but collective bargaining agreements, health insurance, payroll taxes, and pension. So 3.08% is the budget increase that was approved at referendum for fiscal year 19. So part of the increase does have to do with health insurance, and we'll talk about that later. But as is the case every year, we do have other contractual obligations besides those three. So we have out-of-district tuition and settlement agreements, we have a new cleaning contract, we have legal representation, we have other contractual increases such as transportation, ESS, KERMA, facility and security contracts. This coupled with liability reductions. A few years ago we talked about moving away from technology leases. This is the year that we see a portion of that benefit. So a portion of that $200,000 savings is that decision to move away from that type of purchasing. So this factoring in with decreasing costs for staffing changes, the RFP savings that we mentioned, and a small increase in non-contractual, non-personnel items get us to that 4.32%. As Bill talked about, our budget is allocated across our strategic goals, and as one would expect, the bulk of our resources go towards academic excellence and gauging district progress. So we have 3 recommended investment areas, and we'll start first with Dr. Craw.
Good evening, Board. Very pleased to speak with you this evening. And if we talk about this first investment, academic excellence, it's an area that Weston as a community has taken great pride in over the years. We've had a long tradition of academic success, academic excellence, and that's really attributed to our K-12 system. Students, teachers, administrators, families are really committed to helping our students be successful. And if you look at, see this next slide, the first 3 bullets Dr. McCursey emphasized at the beginning of his presentation. I won't repeat them, but when you think about it, it really starts at the elementary level with our focus on reading, ensuring that students are very successful there. We have interventions in place if they are struggling in any way, and that's critical. And that leads to our rigorous secondary programs in the middle and high school. And at the high school level, you see a couple of bullets here in terms of AP performance, which shows tremendous breadth, depth of advanced placement work. Our performance on AP assessments and the participation rate are extremely high. why this investment matters, if we look at this current budget, the FY20 budget, we've stayed within the class size guidelines for the board, and we've had class size guidelines in place for many years. This budget maintains those class sizes. There's essential resources for the academic programs. We've also included in here, because the English language learner population has increased, a fractional FTE, 0.4 FTE, for an ELL certified teacher to work with students across all 4 buildings to help them with the English language as they make that transition. And then, of course, we've had a commitment to helping our staff improve their own performance, grow as professionals, and we continue that commitment in this budget. But I think one thing that's unique this year is are the new state-mandated graduation requirements. This budget does respond to these mandates. The number of credits at Weston High School for the class of 2023 will have to increase as a result of state legislation from 24 credits to 25. And in addition, the distribution of those credits has changed, which, for example, in health, we have increased credit expectations for health, which meant that we had to increase the staffing for health at the high school slightly. That's included in this budget as well. So with that, the next area of investment is pupil services and special education that picks up on our investment from last year. And Mike Rizzo will take the presentation from there.
Thank you. I want to emphasize and actually just build on from what Dr. Craw was saying. This is a year of building on what was invested last year, and I'm going to just take a second to talk about that because I think it's really important that everyone understands how that narrative is evolving based on the investments the board made last year. So I want to emphasize that the pupil services and special education budget is really a budget for all students. These 2 departments reach a wide range of students, both those receiving special education services and other students who just require support and interventions for a variety of reasons. The FY19 budget, you can see up there, really focused on enhanced administrative attention, effective school solutions as a continuing investment, the positions of a social worker and a BCBA, as well as the addition of a college career counselor. I want to just highlight a few examples of how those things are working right now, because I think it's important for the board to understand that. There are specific examples that I can give you, student-specific examples that I can give you about how the enhanced administrative attention that was provided through the addition of the director, the assistant director for pupil services last year, has worked with our building administrators to better meet the needs of our students and to help our staff successfully meet the needs of students. This has been done on several occasions, and I can give specific examples of that. These are students that may have not been able to have their needs met within the school system last year and may have resulted in additional tuitions for the district. The addition of that position has allowed the district to focus on our IEP development, looking at how we use our non-certified personnel across the district, trying to find efficiencies in that usage so that we can increase student independence in those areas. If you look at the positions of the BCBA and the social worker that were added last year, both of those have allowed us to better meet the needs of students in this district, working with not only the students, their families, and the teams on which those students are a part. So it's a very important investment that we made, and it is working. I'll also say that it is not only about keeping students in district, but it is about finding what they need educationally. And both of those positions, the social worker in particular, that position has led to finding education, helping students receive the education that they need. And in some cases, that is not within the Weston Public Schools. We have needed to look elsewhere. But it's about finding what is right for that individual student and getting that student into school so that that student can benefit from an education. And then finally, with ESS, the Effective School Solutions Program that operates within our high school, we have been able to really capitalize that investment this year, stretching the scope of that program. They are mainly based in the high school. They have a cohort right now of 16 students. That cohort is mixed of both regular ed and special education students. So we are not only addressing the needs of our special education students in that program, we are helping get ahead of intervention with students in regular education programs so that they can have their needs met. They've also worked with our middle school, both with the staff and the students, and consulted with our elementary schools. So we have been able to take that investment that began at the high school and stretch it into the other levels. So that's been a tremendous asset. Looking into the the fiscal year 20 investments, we are looking for an investment in the professional development. So if you think of last year as adding staff, we need to now provide additional professional development for that staff so that they can meet the needs of our students. We are investing, I'd like to invest in BCBA clinical supervision. Our board-certified behavior analysts are typically involved with our most complex learners. These are students with a variety of needs, and the clinical supervision that a BCBA needs and can benefit from is significant. Not only will that help those individuals, it'll help the teams on which they function, it'll help the paraprofessionals that are in our buildings delivering services to these students, and potentially it will have an impact on families as we can offer more parent workshops in this area. And finally, the other significant investment within the fiscal year 20 budget is within our tuition and legal representation. We have worked very hard, Mr. Rudel and I, on looking at our tuition, making sure that we are accounting for everything that we can account for, budgeting ahead carefully. There is an increase in this area, but as you will see later on, it is Rich can use the slower rate of spending, perhaps. Is that the right? All right, than what has been experienced previously. So it's a continued work on our part. Regarding the legal representation, it is important as a district that we inform parents of all of their rights in the special education process, and we take great pains as a district to do that and make sure that they understand what their rights are. As a district, when those rights are exercised by families, we need to be in a position to respond to that and do that comprehensively and very analytically. So that representation is an absolute necessary part of the program. So all of these matter because they help us reach towards our goals. The department goals include increasing the effectiveness of our internal management, developing capacity within our buildings, and developing the parent partnerships with increasing transparency and providing information. Those investments are targeted to accomplish those goals, and I think very meaningful for helping all of us meet the needs of the variety of learners that we see in our school system. Thank you. And Rich will talk about facilities.
So our third investment area is facilities. For many years, when budget reductions had to be made, we took it from facilities in order to protect the classroom. When we had shortfalls within special education or other areas, we took it from facilities. We have many competing needs for facilities, and we need to invest in our facilities to ensure they're properly maintained, because believe it or not, academic outcomes can and will be affected by neglected facilities. So why does an investment in facilities matter? Well, as you can see from the images on the slide, these are just two images of some of the issues that our staff is dealing with. First is a rotted out pipe to a boiler at Hurlbut. The others are damages to our roofs. So these are items that 5 maintenance staff members scramble to address year-round with limited resources. We get on average 2,500 work orders a year spread out amongst 5 people who worked on average for the first 5 months of this school year about 70 hours a week to maintain 600,000 square feet of buildings. What this budget recommends is a small portion of funds to help address our boilers, our roofs, and plumbing. The amount we ask for isn't the full amount of what we need, but it's the amount that we feel we can ask for given the amount of issues that still have to be addressed in 600,000 square feet of building and given the competing priorities within a budget. We also have a 10-year capital study that was done last year, which identified nearly $30 million worth of items that should be considered over the next 10 years. We had a 5-year evaluation of our Xenon plant, which factors into both the capital and operating budget we're recommending. The items in these studies identify crucial repairs and funds that are needed for items that most people take for granted and don't consider because they're largely behind the scenes. But they're items that impact every student and every employee within the district. Items from plumbing, heating, roofs to hot water. They're not things that make a difference from the look or the feel or the appearance of the building, but they matter. We have an RFP out for contracted cleaning services that we're currently evaluating. This represents a large portion of the increase of the budget as well. almost 0.5% of the budget increase is due to this one area. We have firms who have bid and will provide careful, detailed reports to both building administrators and facility staff about the work that was accomplished during the night before. We have firms who are offering the use of technology to ensure that the contract staff show up on time, they do the work that they're supposed to do, and expectations are meted. What we want from a company in contracted cleaning is somebody that will ensure quality control. We expect a new contract will elevate the level of cleanliness in our buildings as outlined in the bid specs, and we'll expect nothing less from a new contract. And one of the reasons it's increasing, if we look at the minimum wage rates over the past 10 years, they've grown. And this growth area is affecting the cost of a contracted cleaning company. But is far less if we would have done this in-house. If we were to bring this in-house rather than a $200,000 increase, you'd be looking at an increase well north of $1 million. So contracting out makes sense in this area. It's one of the reasons why we're able to bring a budget that, while is high, is still fiscally responsible. And when facilities are neglected, much larger problems develop. We only have to look at other districts in Westport, Stanford, and Greenwich to see what happens when you neglect your facilities and you don't invest in your facilities. The impact is significant both financially and educationally because things are disrupted. Classrooms are closed, buildings are closed, and students are moved. So a small investment in facilities will go a long way.
Investments in a tight budget, it's almost an odd word. And in education, investment's often not talked about. But since I've been here in Weston, we've talked about investments, and that's something throughout my whole education career. Investment here is a qualitative as much as a quantitative. It's what we do for students. And I'm pivoting now to the schools. I'm going to pivot to the principals to talk a bit. So, board, you're hearing from a few more people this year, and that's intentional. Because those three investments that we featured, which is really with existing money, it's the return for the students, but across all those, you see us also looking at significant cost avoidance. Greenwich was mentioned as not paying attention to facilities. I will put my Greenwich hat on. I'm the longest serving superintendent in Greenwich in 20 years. My daughter is in a building in Greenwich where half the building is relocated for half this year due to a water problem. Greenwich is one of the wealthiest communities you can find. Westport, led by Colleen Palmer, former superintendent here, they've relocated an entire building worth of students. Nobody's necessarily done anything wrong, but it's that kind of attention to facilities we have to give. Special education is an area for all students through the PPS and SPED work, as Mike Rizzo stressed, and certainly academic excellence reaches to all students. So what I'm asking the principals to do is to just highlight for us now what is in this budget that's so important. We're going to start with Laura, then we'll move to Patty, then to Dan, and then to Lisa. And I will still stand here. Sorry. Laura, you can go there right through the mic.
At Hurlbut, can you hear me?
Yep.
At Hurlbut, we pride ourselves on welcoming in our students into the Weston public school system. It's their first beginning into the journey through all the schools, so we take great care in providing very personalized education for their academic, emotional, and emotional needs. We have spent a tremendous amount of time rolling out our emotional intelligence initiatives, which have been supported by the budget, as well as providing technological resources to ensure that all of our learners have the personalized and individualized education that they deserve. This budget does reflect a very mild reduction of 5 students within the school, so it represents stable class sections which are redistributed across the grades to reflect the enrollment projections.
At the intermediate school, one of our focuses is really to be a positive, caring community of learners, and we do that in a variety of ways. We are continually looking at our curriculum and our content and our programs to create challenging and differentiated learning experiences that really help our students, especially at this age, to become better problem solvers and communicators and collaborators, and really preparing them so to go on to the next level of their education. Next year, we will continue with our implementation of the new science curriculum. So this year we piloted the new curriculum in 5th grade. Next year, both 3rd and 4th will have the new curriculum in our school. Obviously, a big focus for us is on creating a positive, healthy learning environment. So we obviously will continue with the work that we've been doing through the Yale Emotional Intelligence and the Ruler program, as well as continue with responsive classroom and PBIS strategies. Our digital resources will continue to be expanded by implementing them through the classroom and curriculum and technology through not only the curriculum, but also through the use of Makerspace and through the Learning Library Commons. We are projecting an increase of 3 students, so it's a pretty minimum increase. And we really worked with our budget to look at our projections and make sure that we were working within class guidelines, with our board guidelines for class size.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you briefly about the Weston Middle School budget. Weston Middle School is a very special place where caring adults assist our students as they transition from childhood to early adolescence. We have a projected enrollment for the 2019-2020 school year of 581 students, which is virtually the same as our current enrollment. We are proposing the same staffing levels for next year that we have currently, with slight adjustments based on enrollment in specific programs. We are proposing an additional trimester of art for students in 7th and 8th grade. This replaces Science Discovery Workshop and Passion Project during the Practical and Fine Arts block. We will continue to offer Science Discovery Workshop and Passion Project as enrichment opportunities during our extension block. This budget will allow us to maintain our strong core academic program as well as our practical and fine arts program, which include general music, band, chorus, orchestra, art, physical education, health and wellness, technology and engineering, and world language.
Good evening. Lisa Diorio, principal of the high school. Just in summary, when you look at the Weston High School, what we are most proud about and what we really focus on is our rich academic programming and also the access of our courses to all students. And so with that in mind, when you look at our staffing, overall we have an increase of a request of only a 0.1 FTE, and through careful analysis and reallocation of courses based on student needs and providing that access, we are proposing 3 new AP courses, 2 of which are specifically designed to have more students be able to take those courses with the requisites that they need, as well as an increase in our Project Lead the Way STEM program, which we're very proud about. Increasing only by 0.1, considering that we have a state mandate of increasing FTE in health, that's one of these unfunded mandates by the state, in 0.3, I think that we, we've done the very best we can to continue the excellent academic program that the community is extremely proud of. Thank you.
Before Rich steps back, I want to actually bring a concept of leverage into this room in 3 numbers. There are 17, 18 people gathered here. That's our administrative leadership team. They help leverage about 300 staff. They help them leverage high-quality work for 2,300 students. I've been around in a lot of organizations. When you have 17 to 18 able to then influence all the way through to 2,300 in terms of the work you're seeing here, that's remarkable leverage. That's also a lot of efficiency, a lot of effectiveness tied to that efficiency. So the assistant principals are here, the directors of the different areas are here, because that lean team of 17, 18 helps leverage the 300 plus who are most directly with the students who then are those 2,300. So now Rich will come up to give you the real numbers in this budget.
So as we discussed, we are recommending a 4.32% increase to the budget. If we look at the broad categories here, one might ask what's causing some of those high percentage increases. Well, the benefits largely relate to health insurance. Professional and technical services relate to legal representation and professional development. Property services relate to the cleaning contract. Other services represent out-of-district tuition and settlements. Again, those are the large items driving this budget increase. So while our budget increase is larger than previous requests, when we look at how the budget was derived, we see we aren't simply asking for new items, new personnel. We really are just maintaining the excellent school system that we have. We simply have certain financial pressure points driving the budget up. So we have personnel and FTE changes, which are essentially flat. We are reducing about 0.34 FTE with a budgetary savings of $27,000. We identified positions on scheduling and effectiveness that are reduced, and we have increases based on class size guidelines set by the board and state mandates. For those who participate in the finance committee, we did have to add special education paras this year and an increase to the physical therapist FTE in order to accommodate student needs. So even when taking into account these post-budget increases, personnel changes have been reduced and reflect a reduction in the budget. We have, over the past year, issued a number of RFPs, or requests for proposals, in an effort to find more financially advantageous contracts whenever possible. We issued an RFP for life and disability insurance, saving almost $45,000. We issued an RFP for trash removal, saving over $23,000. We issued an RFP for a new maintenance provider for the Xenon plant, saving over $10,000. We issued an RFP for propane services, saving about $1,000. We issued an RFP for fire alarm systems, saving about $5,000. And we issued an RFP for benefit advisory services, saving about $17,000. All told, these RFPs saved the district about $100,000. So if we had not issued these RFPs, instead of asking for a 4.32%, we would ask for a 4.52%. So whenever possible, we do always look for advantageous contracts for the district, areas we can improve and areas we can save money. So there are items within the budget that fall within non-contractual, non-personnel items. One might ask what those are. It can be anything from books to materials to dues and fees, as an example. We aimed as an administrative team to keep these as close to flat as possible. The one area we increased, we discussed earlier, is facilities, and those items being additional funding for plumbing, for roofs, for boilers, that are essential to help make a small dent in the need for addressing maintenance issues that have arisen. These are largely funds to help our maintenance staff address repairs throughout the district, whether it be to pumps or motors. It's not an amount that will allow us to make significant strides in how we handle the work, but it's an amount that's needed to help facilitate repairs and maintenance of key systems. And without these pressing needs, this category would largely be flat. So while we want the Board of Ed and the public to be able to look at this budget in a number of different ways so that they can understand really what's driving this to be a higher than normal budget increase for Weston. So we want to break down the budget into different buckets so everybody can understand what's driving the cost. So as we pointed to earlier, we have contractual salary increases for our collective bargaining agreements representing about 1.66%. So again, if we had nothing else in this budget, our budget would go up 1.66% just on those items alone. Had we not moved to the state partnership plan and not had net migration onto the plan, which means we had staff members who chose to go from their spouse's plan to our plan when we changed to the state partnership plan, the year-over-year increase would have been about 1%. But the changes to the state partnership plan, as we explained last year, meant that we were going to save a significant amount of money, but we were going to see higher year-over-year costs as we were on the plan. The state partnership plan is a PPO as opposed to a high-deductible health plan, so you do have larger growth rates. Payroll taxes and pension represent about 0.18%. The bus contract represents about 0.07%. Facility and security service contracts represent 0.07%. Other contractual increases such as KERMA, which is workers' compensation, liability insurance, property insurance, ESS, as Mike talked about earlier, software contracts representing about 0.17%. And while we're planning to offer an insurance buyout to staff, we think this will save about $200,000 to the district. And as we mentioned earlier, we have liability reductions. We have technology lease payments that are falling off the budget and a historical early retirement incentive that's falling off the budget. Those save about $236,000 a year. If we look at just these buckets alone, it's a 2.39% increase. That's typically what Weston has passed for an educational budget here in this community. But as we talked about earlier, fiscal year 20 is just not that simple. We have higher than normal increases in health insurance because of two factors. Being on the state partnership plan, it is a PPO, not a high deductible health plan. So while we saved $3 million, as I mentioned earlier, it meant higher year-over-year increases. If we look at other districts whose budgets are out, who are also on the state partnership plan, such as Trumbull, Fairfield, Norwalk, Brookfield, they're seeing growth in their health insurance budget of about 1.3% of their overall budget. That's similar to what we're seeing as well. When you factor in the net migration of employees who weren't on our plan to our plan, you're getting to about that 1.6% increase in the overall budget. So this creates a higher growth rate than we would have liked, but we saved $3 million up front to have a higher growth rate. Saving $3 million up front meant you were only going to have 1 year of a budgetary benefit, and that benefit was fiscal year 19. So we could have foregone $3 million in savings and had a budget increase of 3.79%, and I'm sure everybody at this table would have preferred to see a budget under 4%, but that would not have been in the best interest of the Board of Ed or the town or any of the taxpayers, as saving $3 million, even if it's part of it is cost avoidance, makes far more sense than having to deal with a smaller growth, a slightly higher increase in the growth rate in following years. We have special education, increases totaling almost $500,000 in out-of-district tuition and settlements. This alone adds about 0.86% to our budget. And while this increase is significant, it is a significant improvement over last year, where we were facing a $1.6 million deficit. In fact, the growth rate is one of the smaller tuition growth rates in many years, and that's proof that the investment made last year is working and starting to pay dividends, and we'll talk about that more later. We have legal representation for both special education and the district. These are funds needed to ensure that the district is on sound footing and being represented strongly when necessary. And if a small investment here will allow for more savings long term, it's a sound allocation of resources when considering long-term ramifications in budgeting. And also, finally, we have the cleaning contract, which we touched on earlier. We've talked about the cleaning contract for nearly 4 years and the impact of what a new cleaning contract would be. When our current provider attempted to unionize, our current contract provider asked us to reopen the contract, pay more. We politely declined. As the minimum wage rates have risen, labor costs in the area have also risen. Originally, we were expecting an increase of nearly $700,000 from our current costs, but through competitive bidding process, it looks like it'll be closer to around $200,000. So the bid is currently being reviewed, and we started interviewing companies this week, and the bid review committee consists of myself, the facilities director, 2 assistant principals, a Board of Ed representative, Ellen Usinoff, a custodian representative, and a food service director. If we were to do this on our own, we would be looking at an increase, instead of $200,000, well over $1 million. So these 4 items alone represent 2% of our budget increase. So if it was not for these 4 items, we would have a budget increase 2% less than where we're at. So let's look at a couple of the financial drivers within these 4 financial constraints. So first, health insurance. So as you can see, the district saved about $2.9 million by moving to the state partnership plan last fiscal year. However, those savings, again, only created 1-year budgetary savings, as the rest comes through cost avoidance. So had we stayed with a high deductible plan, it's estimated that our health insurance budget would have been about $8.2 million, as opposed to a budget of about $6.9 million. But the growth rate differential is about $300,000 less had we been on a high deductible health plan. So again, that's about 0.5% on your budget. So as I said earlier, we'd all like to see a budget under 4%. Passing up nearly $3 million in lifetime savings wouldn't really be worth it. Again, this is something that we're probably going to see in future years as more districts move to the state partnership plan. So while we moved, Westport moved, Bridgeport moved, Stanford moved, Norwalk moved, Trumbull moved, Brookfield moved, many districts throughout the state have moved. And as more high-cost Fairfield counties go up into the pool, the costs are expected to grow. Special education. Out-of-district tuition had been a large focal point of the budget last year, when we hit about a $1.6 million shortfall. So cost overruns have been pretty routine in this category for the last 6 years. And in fiscal year 19, as Mike had mentioned, we implemented a new structure, new administrative structure, social worker, BCBA, new legal representation, a new assistant superintendent for pupil services, and many structural enhancements. And last year, we said we wouldn't solve the problem all in 1 year, but our goal was to make systematic improvements by laying a new foundation that will allow the district to tackle very complex problems. Well, the structure is working, and as you can see from the chart, while we have an overage this year, it's the lowest overage in 6 years. And more importantly, we spent $3.1 million in this line item last year. And while we are asking for it in fiscal year 20, it's $3.1 million. So we're asking for essentially the same amount of money that we spent last year. One would ask, why does the budget grow when you're asking for the same amount of money? We did have students who aged out. We do budget to the student, so when the student ages out, it affects our budget, but the spend rate is essentially flat year over year. That means progress is being made, and the vital investments that were made last year really do need to continue. And if the investment in this budget, which includes professional development, clinical supervision, strengthened legal representation, are supported to ensure we continue to see the progress we made this year into next year. These investments are too important given the size and scope of what's before us financially. We don't want to lose the momentum that has been gained this year from the changes being short-sighted and pulling back in an area that has driven growth rates in our budget over time. Reducing expenses here can potentially cause you to see larger increases in future years. There's no more volatile part of our budget than special education, and the small amount of resources we're asking for next year through PD or clinical supervision or legal representation are crucial to continue the success that we've seen. So when we pull the budget together by carving it out into different subsets, we see what's causing the growth rate in the budget. So again, we have those items that we identified as contractual obligations at 2.39%. We have those 4 financial constraints we mentioned adding about 2%. If we look at FTE and personnel changes, RFP savings, and non-personal, non-contractual areas, we get to that 4.32%. So how does the budget compare to last year? Well, we do understand that this is the largest growth rate that we're asking for in at least the last 10 years. It's a growth rate that Weston is not usually used to in their education budgets. But we've seen as we've broken down this budget, it's not a budget with excess, it's not a budget with new initiatives or proposals, but a budget that really allows us to maintain the excellent academic environment Weston expects. It's that academic environment that drives people to move to Weston. As seen in the citizen survey conducted by the town, 3/4 of the people answered the reason they moved to Weston was the school system. This budget allows the system to continue to be one of excellence and attract people who want to move in Weston and stay in Weston. If we look to make unwise reductions, we risk the quality of our school system that is so important to so many people who live here. So let's compare the budget to the past. As we discussed before, we have those identified items of contractual obligations of about 2.39% when excluding those financial constraints. When we add in the changes to staffing, the RFP savings, and the non-contractual, non-personnel items, we're at 2.31%. The historical 5-year average for Weston is 2.46%. So if it wasn't for those 4 areas, we'd actually be under the 5-year average. But we do have those 4 financial constraints. So when you couple those together, it's a 4.32%. Those are the drivers, those 4 items, that are causing a higher growth rate than expected and bringing a request that's deviating from the past. So as we talked about earlier in facilities, our facilities matter, and so does our capital budget. So we have 8 items that we've requested, which are largely driven from the Phase 1 facility study conducted by Silver Petroselli. If we want to maintain our facilities, the capital budget is just as important as the operating budget. It might not get as much attention as the operating budget, but these items matter. First, we have $100,000 for new xenon plant controls. This is a crucial item. If the system fails that we currently have now, the entire plant will go down. It is our highest ranked priority within this capital list. There is no item out of these 8 items that is more important than number 1 on this list. The second item is the replacement of the chiller at Hurlbut for $180,000. As those from Facilities Committee and Finance Committee are aware, the chiller has been on its last legs for years. We have put costly repairs into keeping it up and running. We've brought in vendors, we've used our own staff, but it can't be repaired anymore. It has to be replaced. We have 2 oil tanks set for replacement at the high school and the middle school. We're proposing removing them but not replacing them, and while they're not immediate savings to not replacing them, 30 years from now when someone's doing the budget, you won't have to see this as an item to be replaced. At the recommendation of our fire marshal, we have $75,000 for replacement upgrades of our fire alarm equipment and fire code upgrades. We have student locker replacements at the middle school for $185,000. The lockers at the middle school are in disrepair. Many are broken, and the available lockers for students are shrinking each year as more and more become unusable. This would allow for all new lockers within the school. We have replacement of water heaters at Hurlbut and the high school for $115,000. We have roof repairs for the WIS and the high school, plus concrete repair at the high school. This was a request that we attempted to fund partially through a supplemental from the savings from the knee wall project, which was a project this summer, but there was not adequate support within the town to move forward with that. We have 9 identified roof leaks at the WIS, as well as a few at the high school, and again, those concrete repairs that were not a part of that request of a supplemental appropriation. And finally, we have a refurbishment of a gym floor at North House. All told, these 8 items represent $868,000 as our Tier 1 requests. This year, though, we're also asking for school security initiatives for our capital fund. While we won't identify what those specific items are, they are to enhance the security infrastructure of the school, and we have applied for round 4 of the school security grant, which is a reimbursement grant. So if this funding is approved and we go forward with the purchase, we stand to receive a reimbursement from the state of Connecticut of about $105,000. Previously this year, we also applied for another school security grant. We did receive, and we have that money actually in the bank, $31,000 in grant funding, which can be used to help pay for some of these initiatives. So all told, we're asking for $321,000 of school security infrastructure upgrades. We were also approached by the town about a joint town Board of Ed project to upgrade the street lights to LED, a project that has about an 8-year payback time from savings from the light conversion, so the cost that's going to be outlaid. So we would expect the town to take the lead on this project. It was something that they approached us about, but the approach was supportive, and we are trying to work together whenever possible with the town. So these 3 buckets represent about $1.2 million for a capital request.
So I'm going to wrap us up, and I'm going to hit some themes that were at the end of the executive summary in this very large budget. I had shared that executive summary quite widely after we met on the 9th with all of the families in the district, all of the staff. I also wrote at the end of this afternoon to all the staff, and if the board saw that note, I was stressing in that we're in partnership with the board. Many other districts, both within the state and elsewhere at this point, as an administration comes forward with a difficult budget, that partnership, if it exists, breaks down. I'm confident we will keep the partnership. I'm confident we will keep this sense of working together. And that's why if you read the note I sent to the entire staff, I shared it with the cabinet principals, then I added to it later. I really stressed that you as a board are deeply supportive of everyone here. And that as we go through this difficult process, first and foremost in your minds is supporting all of our students in all the ways we can. But we do face some difficult decisions. And I want to end by stressing to you as a board and to the community watching that we made some tough decisions, all of those around me and behind me, in terms of budget reductions and denied requests. We believe in being very careful stewards for the resources that Weston so generously provides. Basically, every dollar we have comes through the tax dollars, the generosity of residents in this community. That's an incredibly high ratio. We embrace that. We understand that. We are very, very careful then about what we do. When we first began building this budget, there was nearly 6% in increase. We said that is impossible. So we worked to drive that number down, largely again based on that sense of stewardship, being cautious and careful with the generosity of taxpayers in Weston. So we are saying, and words cannot be minced now, that this budget, as we have repeated and repeated, President Reagan said, you get a message, repeat it. Our message we are repeating is that at 4.32, this is really a flat budget, believe it or not. That this funding is required to allow this district to stay as a jewel in the crown of Weston. If we're not able to receive the requested funding, we then begin to put this district at risk. That's a factual comment. It's not meant to break apart a partnership. It's not meant to break apart a relationship. It's just to bring you, as we see it as leaders of this district, the administrators, where we are. So we've been looking at all options. 4 factors lead us to say that this 4.32 is essential. I'll talk quickly about limited budget flexibility. I'll talk about a history of cutbacks and finding efficiencies. I'll talk about denied requests. And then I'll also talk about, which will be a conversation I think for us over the next several meetings, is what would we cut if we have to cut? First, limited budget flexibility. A common refrain around big budgets is, my goodness, you've got a big budget, you got the money, go find it. That is a fallacy. That is just not the case. As this diagram I'm about to show you reveals, nearly all of our money is allocated. Some 87% of it is in personnel, which is tied to contracts. You then see that the larger rest of it is also obligated. So we do not have places to go to absorb significant overages, significant surprises. Witness the roof discussion that Rich mentioned earlier, a savings out of a capital project. It was essential we use that money for something within the district because finding another $40,000 immediately was not possible as we deal with the leaks on the WIS roof. Our second factor, and this is partially relates to the flexibility, it's a bit of a paradox, is that we have now a very strong record over the last several years in Weston of finding efficiencies and making cutbacks. So we're at the point where we just have not a lot of flexibility in our budgets if we're not funded at the level requested. Right here, some 12 to 15 items show significant reductions that have had an impact. Reducing the copy center staffing, reducing security specialists, reducing groundskeepers, eliminating technology integrators, reducing school psychologists, reducing school-based special ed clerical staff, reducing middle school after-school sports. Fortunately, we were able to transition that over to the town. We think that's working well. So that's a nice example of us working with other governmental bodies to find efficiency. In this year's budget alone, reducing of the SPED transition coordinator. We had a retirement which is helping us there, but then we are reducing that position. Reduction in the Library Learning Commons technology specialist, a very difficult decision, but we had to make that. Reduction in the middle school science para, a very difficult decision, given how much we value high-quality science instruction. And already the middle school faculty has questions about that, concerns about how they can support high-quality science instruction with that reduction made. The insurance buyout incentive, we hope, will be a pain-free push, and then the WTA early retirement incentive the board has endorsed and now is in operation. We hope that, in essence, will be a pain-free but an efficiency. As Rich has noted, we've been managing all our contracts with great efficiency. I want to make sure that the town is reminded that our current WTA contract, that's the lowest increase that the WTA has seen in many, many years, and it's the lowest increase of any area Fairfield County district. That's our largest group of personnel. It's critical we support our teachers at the highest level possible, but they themselves, through negotiation with the board, saw the need for efficiencies. So we have to remember that as we look at this. We've talked a lot about the health plan, but also I want to reiterate that looking at RFPs across all our non-personnel items, as Rich has stressed, has found us some $100,000 in savings. We keep looking for those efficiencies. Factor 3. Many of you have managed budgets in your own organizations, in your own careers. You know that it's standard to say, nice request, but no. Nice request, but no. But we have done that. We should do that. We continue to do that. It's not typical for us to share that list of things we've turned back, but we're doing that tonight. We're putting that in the public record so that you as a board, the community, see that we said no to a lot of critical work. Top of that list, we are considering school start and end times. Again, I have to mention Greenwich. Probably now the best case study in that. Their transportation budget went up over $1.2 million. Much bigger district, much more complicated transportation arrangement, but you do not go into this initiative and leave yourself no transportation room budgetarily. That's what we're doing. If we get into this, and that may be one reason if we do a modest change, is we cannot afford another bus. But every district almost that's gone into this, successes in Seattle, trumpeted across the country now, great increase in transportation. So that right there, for example, is a very tough decision. You can go right down the list, talking about facilities. Westport, Greenwich, elsewhere. You do not want to not support your facilities, but even for the slight growth we're asking, we've said no on a number of things there. Preventative maintenance for our buildings. Other facilities, things we're turning back. Technology equipment. Turning back increased staffing for world language. Turning back increased staffing for the writing center. Turning back new software. saying no on additional support for the copy center, saying will exist on a 1.0 staff copy center, which has been a big change in this district. You don't have to go far in talking to teachers about the transitions this year with that. Jumping down to a PSAT pilot for 9th grade, a small item, but where even at the smallest level we're saying we're just not able to do that right now. So you can see all the way through, we have said no on very core elements. Now, what would we cut? We've repeatedly asked ourselves, what else in this budget can we reduce to keep that growth percentage down? We expect that you as a Board of Ed will ask that. That's your job. We expect that. We will work with you on those questions. We expect that no matter what budget you approve and adopt, likely the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, residents in the town would say, what else could you cut? And typically, administrators now don't show the list. But we went there because we want to show you, at least by now, by category, where we will have to go. And again, this is factual. It's not scare. It's just to say factually, here's where we'll go. We will have to look at increasing class sizes and or reducing the number of sections. We will have to look to cut program offerings. Remember, go back. Here are the things we did not put on the list. You already see up there a whole set of curriculum and academic work that's critical, facilities work that's critical. So we already said no to that, so we know where we're going to have to go. Instructional software and devices, we'll have to cut deeper. After schools, clubs, and activities, we will have to cut there. The number and levels of athletic teams, we will conceivably have to cut there. The number and range of performing arts offerings, we will have to cut there. Administration oversight and administrative support, we may have to cut there. And remember that leverage ratio, 17 to 300 to 2,300. Incredible efficiency there. We are not overstaffed at the administrative level by any stretch of the imagination. And we will have to reduce facility maintenance and repair. Those are the 8 areas we'd have to go into. Cuts in any of those areas will put us at great risk as a district. You can see the summary points there. We would be sadly on a path towards being severely limited in the mission we have to educate students at the highest level, intellectually, socially, emotionally, and physically. The jewel in the crown for this town, as you know, 75% in the survey are saying we're here for the schools, that would become in question. And because even though we're small, I like to say we're small but powerful, we try and have an image well beyond this state, well beyond the region, where we are a beacon for what public education can be, that would be at risk. We're asking for full support of the budget. We know we'll be in discussions about that. Echoing last year's approach, where we knew we had growth, we then tried to isolate all those other areas. So for now, for several years, Weston's really been in a cutback mode with budgets. This is growth baked in after several years of very, very tight budgets. And we're asking for this help so we can continue to be a very robust school system and district serving all of our students. So lots of words, lots of purposeful repetition, but if in a few words, this is it. We hope and believe that this budget is the way to make a difference for every student in the Weston Public Schools. So I look forward to the discussions, the work over the next several meetings, the rest of tonight, and thank you for all of your support and your great partnership.
Dr. McCursey, I would like to thank you and your team for the presentation. And before we get into our Q&A session, I just wanted to see we had some people join us after my opening statement. This is the time for public comment. We would ask anybody to sign in over by the materials on the table. So Meredith, has anyone signed in as of yet? So I'm assuming none of you want to speak at this point? Right, so with that, yeah, there will be chances at both upcoming meetings for public comment. So with that, I think it's time for the board to get down to business with our Q&A over the budget. Just to review what we've done so far, Dr. McCursey and his team started working on the budget last fall. I believe October would be a good estimate of when you started. Ultimately, we were delivered our budget books the first Friday once everybody returned from the holiday break. And then on January 9th, we had a 4-hour workshop with intensive questioning of the board to the administrative team. Ultimately, there were written questions submitted as follow-up. All of those questions are posted on the website. And then now we are here to continue our deliberations and our discussions. So, you're looking at me funny. You want to start?
Sure, why not? 'Cause, yay. I have a question about, I guess this is for any of the 4 of you guys. Your buildings, copiers, laminators, do all of you guys have them?
Sarah, make sure you speak.
Oh. I hate the microphone. Do all of your buildings have copiers, laminators, real ones, little ones? Like, are they substantial? Can they actually make books, or like, what have you got in your actual buildings, not in the copy center? Like, what do you have in your buildings? And I should know this, but I don't.
I can start the answer, but we may have other people in the room that know more specifics. We have 2 main photocopy machines in the middle school, one in the main office, which does color copies that teachers can use. We also have a copy machine in the faculty workroom. And given the capacity at the copy center, there have been some renewed guidelines on what gets copied at the copy center and what we expect teachers to copy for themselves in the buildings.
Like, you guys have a laminator.
We have a laminator,
Yes.
and we have a color copy machine in the main office.
Do you guys all have the same setup? Okay, just curiosity. Thank you. That was my first question. I'll let somebody else have a turn, and then I'll have more. Of course, I have lots of questions, because it's me.
Tony? Any questions?
Yeah, no, last year's budget was one where, we spent a lot of time determining whether we wanted to make investments or not, and we decided to make some pointed investments. This year's budget, in many ways, is one about, it's a little tougher because contractual obligations don't necessarily take you off the hook. It's not like these are contractual obligations and you kind of have to live with it. What it does is it makes it even more difficult to go through the list because you know that everything we try to cut now is going to have a real impact. And so in many ways, this is going to be a tougher process than it was last year when we're deciding whether to make an investment or not. So there's a couple of things. First, before I get into some of the details and some of the line items, Rich, one of the things that we haven't mentioned is the Internal Services Fund and just the level at which it's funded, and how do you see the future of that, and is there anything, is there any potential possibilities around using some of that Internal Services Fund money?
Sure. So as of December, we have about $1.5 million in the Internal Services Fund. The issue or the dilemma you have, if you were to use any of that money, when you do your fiscal year 21 budget, you will have a higher budget increase because you're using a non-reoccurring source of revenue to fund a reoccurring expense. So for example, if you were to take $150,000 out of the Internal Services Fund this year to lower your growth rate, you don't have that in fiscal year 21, so you have an automatic increase in expenditures in fiscal year 21. So you start out of the gate with an artificial increase by drawing down assets for a one-time use of funds. At $1.5 million, it is a well-funded internal services fund. I mean, typically, when you're self-insured, you want to have enough to cover your IBNR. So as we changed, we paid out our IBNR. It's still slowly trickling out. Then if we were to change from the state partnership plan back to a self-funded, high-deductible health plan, the run-out would actually be paid on the state plan, so you'd essentially, you'd build up your IBNR as you'd only essentially probably have 10 and a half to 11 months of expenditures on a 12-month plan. You want enough to cover margin, so before we had typically a 15% stop loss, so you want to have at least 15% of available funds of your medical claims. If we were, roughly $8 million, that's, $1.2 million you want to have in the fund at 15%.
Right.
So that $8 million is really reflective of today's rates. If you were to go 5 years from now, given how health insurance has trended in the United States, it's not going to be $8 million. It could be $9 million. It could be $10 million. So that 15%, if it's $10 million, is really $1.5 million, which is essentially where you're at.
The probability of boomeranging back and needing
Right,
that is
is there.
probably pretty low.
Right.
Right. There's some facilities-related increases. A lot of it is, the line items are preventive maintenance, annual cleaning, repair of the boilers, things like that. How much of that could be put against a capital budget versus an operating budget?
None of it.
None of it. It's all
Because it's all general maintenance repairs. It's not putting in new items.
right.
Except I was just going to ask, I'm going to jump in, Tony, on your question. The lightning, the one that I actually asked, the $18,000 for that one lightning rod, maybe, is that one perhaps something that could?
Typically, the town will accept anything over 10. We typically only do anything over 20. The problem is that you approve by line item. If you don't get it approved, it would obviously probably be one of the lower hanging fruits. You won't have it next year.
I can't imagine that would not be approved.
There's a lot of things we couldn't imagine not being approved that weren't approved.
So I actually have a question that's kind of a hybrid between, there are two questions. I understand about not using the internal services fund to apply against the operating because you get the boomerang. But is there any flexibility about determining if there's an amount of the internal services fund that could be carved out to use for capital projects?
You could, in theory, do that. The capital budget is controlled by the town. The payments are controlled by the town, whereas the internal services fund is controlled by us. So we can't pull assets out of the fund. What you would do is you'd short your contribution. So instead of funding $330,000 for dental or $350,000 for dental, let's say you funded $200,000 for dental. You draw off the assets, you'd have that extra $150,000 in your operating budget. You could conceivably do that. I don't necessarily think it is the wisest decision.
It's also not how the fund was established and the purpose of it.
Correct.
So I think it's a real philosophical,
The other thing you have to understand is
discussion to
the
have.
state partnership rates are not set until mid-April.
yeah.
So while our insurance consultant and a number of districts are using an estimated increase of about 8%, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be 8%.
Right.
If we look at this year, the rate increase was higher than a lot of everybody was expecting when they finalized the rates, and that largely happened because Westport joined, Bridgeport joined, and a lot of these others. If we go into, if the state sets the rates mid to end of April, and instead of 8%, it ends up being 8.5% or 9%, you might have to use the internal services fund for that differential as well.
Ellen, I agree with you. The purpose of the fund is not set to be used for these types of projects, but if over a period of years it did develop that there was an excess determined,
Agreed.
it may be worth the discussion about if it makes
So
sense to
those-
utilize. But
We've been drawing down on those excesses for at least a number of years. When the previous individual was first selectman, they imposed a cut to the internal services fund, and then we kind of did that tailored off on a number of years. And then one year we just had really bad claims. And so the fund has actually the number of assets, the amount of assets in the fund has fallen over the last few years.
one follow-up question about the new service contracts. Will those be going out for RFP? Like
Well, there are no necessarily new service contracts.
well, the boiler
So
service?
it's a lot of preventative maintenance, so a lot of it is pumps, motors, parts, things
So
like
it's
that.
not like a service
Correct,
contract?
it's not like a service
Okay,
contract.
just making sure.
We're doing the service.
On that same line of thought, though, it's on.
Ruby, make sure
Is
you
it too
talk
far?
directly into
Too
it.
far away from me, sorry. I love the RFP savings that hit this fiscal budget. That's great, and it shows a great initiative on your part to constantly be challenging every contractor that we have. I'm just wondering, with regards to the facilities number and all of the equipment or the things that we need to buy, how many bids are you going out and getting for any equipment repair, replace, et cetera?
So we either buy things off state contract, which means you're getting it at pretty much as low as you're going to get. We get multiple quotes. If it's over $15,000, we do put it out to bid. A lot of the amounts that you see within the facility budget, they're not one large purchase. It's not one large purchase of $40,000. It's a bunch of small purchases that accumulate. It's parts, it's labor hours, it's things like that. We always go to multiple vendors to get multiple quotes. We either look at state contract or, Joe, who's not here today, is very good at chewing down vendors whenever possible as well.
May I, before Tony goes back to his questions, may I ask a follow-on with the lightning rods? So we, in our question and answers, part of it was saying that this was the high school system that we were, that 18,000 was to fix that last one, and that the other three
Are good.
are good.
Yeah.
So I just want to, and I know I'm being a pain in the butt about this, so Hurlbut, Wiss,
Yep.
and the school
So they are
all
good.
And this
They had
building are set,
there was
and
a
that
repair.
will be done.
Yeah, so there was a repair done this summer to
Right.
One of the WIS ones. So
Right.
there's a lot
Yes,
of them up
I
there.
remember that.
So there was a repair done to one of the WIS ones. The other ones are fine. So WIS is
Okay.
now also fine.
So then this will close
it's
us up
for
and
the high
all
school,
four buildings will be, this was a thing I did not know existed before, and so now that I do, I'm sort of like, okay, I want to fully, thank you.
But
Thank
that
you.
18,000 would not be recurring.
No, and it will fix it, and that is a thing, and it is questionable whether it is capital or not. This is-
Correct. I mean, typically what we have in each facility budget is you have small, what we call special projects. They're usually under $20,000. There's usually an allotment of money, and then every year you kind of cycle through new ones. So while the 18,000 for lightning protection won't happen in 2021, you'll likely have some other smaller type projects that'll just replace it.
I have a couple more. I'm just going to ask questions just to clarify things. I think in the next session, I'll probably have recommendations, and you tell me why those cuts are not going to work, or maybe they would work. But now I'm just going to ask some questions just to get clarifications on things. There's, Craig,
Tony, what schedule are you looking at, just the rest of us can follow along?
there's document A.
Aha. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
We have $78,000 third-party network support, district data technician $66,000, and district data coordinator $56,000. How does this? I'm just confused on how this all works with the town. What's the financial gymnastics that we're going through in terms of sharing this cost with the town?
So there's another spot in the budget
Right.
where there's, Mike, you got, oh yeah, I forgot to ask you for the mic. Hold on.
Yeah.
There's another spot in the budget where there's a reimbursement of $45,000. So that would be the income that comes in from the town.
Okay.
So the town would use a company called Novus for contracted
Right.
support for $45,000. It's
Yep.
a $45,000 expenditure.
Right.
Then there's a $45,000 reimbursement from the town, essentially offsetting that expenditure.
Right.
The expectation is that we would also contract out network administration for $78,000
Right.
with that same vendor. So both the town and the Board of Ed would be contracted out for network support and administration for both the town and the Board of Ed, just different costs.
So this is about $200,000. If you add those up, how much do we?
Well, then there's offsets. If you look
Right.
If you look at the bottom of the schedule,
Mhm.
there's a restructuring to the IT department,
Yep.
which was also reflected in the staffing. So that ends up taking away a systems administrator at $66,000 and a student data coordinator at $88,000.
Oh, got it, yep.
And then there's also some, technical, other professional technical services that were reduced to partially offset those costs.
Okay.
So what's the net of
About $7,000.
So the net is $21,000?
The net's about $7,000
a piece, like?
in
or
total.
in
So the
total.
pluses and minuses net to about 7,000.
Okay. I got it. I didn't see the offset.
Yep.
May I jump in while
Yeah,
Tony's looking?
go ahead.
Ellen just underlined the alertus in here at 30, but it's 60 some odd in the book. What is the recurring cost for the monitoring? Is it the 30 or the 60?
Where do you see the 66?
It was, I have my chicken scratch pages and pages of stuff. It's 4701 on page 209 and 29. Both the item 4701 is on both pages 29 and 209, and 62,000 for alertus. And I'm asking, is that a recurring 62 every year, but it's listed here on
So the
Tony's Schedule
62 is
A?
not just alertus, it's alertus and access control. So it's the two together.
What is access
door
control? She said, okay, she says that she knows she should know this. Thank you.
Yep.
There you go. So many things I cannot keep track of. Thank you.
Yep.
That explains it.
One question under, there was the last session we had a question on consultants. There's an increase on consultants. Part of it was for, in Mike's area, which I understand. The other part was technology. Can you re-clarify that consulting increase on the technology side?
So it's $25,000 for special ed.
Right.
There's a reduction in curriculum for consultants for $5,800.
Right.
So there's $98,000 in the consulting line for technology.
Right.
Part of that is the $45,000 for the town.
Okay.
But the revenue showed under the revenue line
Okay,
item. So
yep.
the consulting line item goes up, but the offset's in the
Okay,
technology.
so the 45,000 for the town
Is
is in
offset,
that
correct.
consulting line. Go ahead, Dan.
Rich, on page 26, with regards to the overtime line item, it looks like historically we've been budgeting around $197,000, $199,000. Last year we budgeted at $173,000. We're back to $199,000. Are we experiencing an overage in this area? And could you speak specifically to the comment you made during the presentation about how our 5 maintenance people have worked an average of 70 hours a week?
Yep. So yes, we do experience overages in this area. They do a lot of work in the summer. What you have to also understand is while they have an 8-hour day, they don't get to work 8 hours because they're doing traffic. So when you take into account traffic and their contractual lunch break, they have a 6-hour day to do work. If work has to happen in the classroom, they're not doing it during the day. They have to do it after hours, or they have to do it on the weekend. Part of what's also reflected in the overtime, we have a line item in facilities called snow removal. It has $12,500. That line item is typically transferred into overtime, usually in the February-March range, depending on when the snow actually hits. So while you see the actuals of 199, 197, you'd have to really deduct the 12,500. So when we look at the 199,700, you'll probably see snow removal in fiscal year 20 transferred up to that, so that'll end up being about 211 and change.
Okay, is there anything we could be doing creatively with our scheduling or with, not using our maintenance people to do traffic
And then you won't have enough people to do traffic based on the traffic plan. So we have maintenance do it, we have grounds do it, we have custodial individuals do it. They're all up and down School Road. It's a pretty significant.
Right, no, I'm understanding that, but that can't that be farmed out as a part-time job at a lower
So
rate?
part of the
or-
problem with hiring a part-time job, there are not a lot of people who are looking for 45 minutes in the morning and then 45 minutes in the afternoon. Part of that is similar to the difficulty we have in finding drivers for special ed. Usually they drive an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half at the end of the day. There are not a lot of people who are looking for not necessarily a 3-hour job, but a 3-hour job with a donut hole of 5 hours in the middle of the day.
And then with regards to the maintenance that needs to happen in the classrooms, can we stagger shifts or no, will we lose
We
that
do
one?
stagger shifts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Forgive me. the line that Sarah was just asking about the access control and alertness
Mhm.
monitoring. On document A, it comes up to a $40,000 total, but it's a $62,000 total on here. One more time, walk me through that, please. On page 29,
Page 29.
4701.
It's on both pages, 29 and
The
29.
1920 request is 62,729.
Which page? Yep, so 62,726.
Yeah. What am I missing? Because I can only add up a total of 40.
Well, you're,
41.
so the Schedule A is showing the increases to the budget, so what makes up the 2.2 million?
you.
You have certain costs that were baked in there as part of.
The holes are punched right over that word. Thank you very
Okay,
much. Oh, that hurts.
So I have a question that's more for the 7 of us, or 6 of us who are here, to contemplate, and this is something for the 6 of us and probably Dr. McCursey to give some thought to, not a decision, just to sort of mull it over. Given the granular level at which we are looking this year, perhaps we should give some thought to the $10,000 we spend on CABE just this year. I don't want, just think about it, and maybe we have a discussion about it next week. I'm just throwing that out there, given the other things we're discussing with the students and the staff, and, okay?
I would like on page 188, Mr. Thomas, Dr. Thomas, to talk just a little bit about the refreshing for both teachers and students of the Chromebook and the numbers that, 168 units, another 25. I know that we're on a replacement cycle. Could you talk about the replacement cycle a little bit? Page 188? You know it by heart.
So that is not a replacement cycle dictated by us. So Google has they designate Chromebooks that are no longer eligible. At the time when they go into planned obsolescence, the state no longer allows us to. Student privacy law. So the 168 devices are the exact number of devices that are in that process.
Easy answer.
I would like to follow up on that question. We asked out of the workshop for a listing of the refresh cycle, and you provided the schedule on page 9 of the supplemental questions that we received. I'm still trying to get my head around, we purchased Chromebooks last year because we were letting the class of 22 take their devices to the high school. And that program is not continuing. So we have a tranche of Chromebooks that were purchased last year that are only a year old. We have a grade that we're allocated Chromebooks that we're not giving them to. So how do we reconcile? Well, I know, but I'm saying.
We don't have Chromebooks that are 1 year old because the Chromebooks that were 1 year old went to the 6th grade, not the 8th grade. And the 8th grade Chromebooks, there were 38 of them for parents that responded that the children would like to have the Chromebook. And then the allocation of the rest remaining parts of the Chromebooks is what was placed on page 9. So they went into replacing already existing end-of-life Chromebooks with a list that was not purchased last year. They went into the programs for TASTE and then to the high school for SPED, and also presented us from buying devices for those 2 programs. And then for the middle school, though, the number 64 is actually not the right number for them. There is a set of Chromebooks here that are actually located in the learning commons that are used as replacements. We have an average of 40 computers that are out for repair. So those are replacements that are given to the students to provide zero downtime to the students.
Mhm. And then just looking at the phasing, in a few years, we're looking at 592 Chromebooks that are going to need to be replaced in 1 year.
Yes, because at some point in time, most likely about 2 or 3 years before I got hired,
Mm-hmm.
the district made a decision to buy that
Yeah.
many Chromebooks because some funding source that they would always
That's a big spike in 1 year.
That's, yes. And historically, that was why we had always thought that we were trying to
Smooth.
regularly budget
Yep.
the same dollar amount
Right.
year after year with new technologies. So we
Right.
flattened it out over time,
Mm-hmm.
but we can't go back in time to fix
Right.
something that was pretty exciting.
On the ninth grade cohort, this is a really small question, but for the students who might have indicated they would like to use the Chromebook but did not ever wind up wanting it, those Chromebooks are being reallocated, correct? They
Those
didn't-
Chromebooks are in the high school library, and we
used.
can get the statistics from the high school library, but according to
They're
the
not
library.
sitting waiting for
No,
oh, good,
they are
thank you.
out
That was-
almost all the time at the
I
high
happen
school
to know of
library.
a couple that
We actually had to
happen.
reduce the sign-out period to a period in order to have enough Chromebooks to go around.
Well, it's good that they're being used.
Kind of sticking with this, could you speak a little bit to the relationship between, in the question and answer page, you said that Chromebooks were being allocated to replace broken or unusable machines, and tying that into the fact that we pay for a warranty on each one of the machines, and that if a machine goes down because of student misuse, I'm not seeing anywhere in the budget book if there's a revenue offset from either reimbursement from warranty or reimbursement from families if a Chromebook is damaged due to negligence.
So the most we've gotten is reimbursement for chargers, which is about $17. It actually started this year. You've gotten about $100.
So why are
Okay,
we
so then
buying-
why are we paying $45 for a warranty per Chromebook? What do we get for that?
I don't understand.
So in the explanation of the breakdown of costs for Chromebooks of $404, one of the costs is, I'm sorry, $40 for warranty.
Right, and that's
So-
warranty repair work.
Okay.
I don't understand.
I mean, so has there been an analysis, are we getting $40 worth of benefit per machine?
So on average, we have about 40 Chromebooks that are damaged on a regular basis.
Okay.
So we submit about 15 requests for warranty parts daily. Because that goes through my office, I would say it's probably between 5 and 15. So the short answer is yes. I haven't actually totaled all that, but I could ask Joanne to total the amount of parts that we're replacing. But we experience a huge amount of a large amount of damage. There's a large amount of regular replacements on the Chromebooks.
Yeah, I mean, my only question with the price of the warranty being, close to 15% of the cost of the machine, if we wouldn't be better self-insuring in that case and just absorbing the cost instead of paying for the warranty up front. I guess we'd need the data on how much we would have spent.
Yeah, it would take a while to do that, but
We could follow up on that later. I mean, that may not be a realistic ask. Well,
Yeah, I mean, is it mainly that it's parts you're receiving? So you'd have to go back and look at all.
we'd have to go back through all the work orders, determine which parts got replaced, then try to price the parts, and then try to put that all together. I mean, it'll take a while because we get hundreds of work orders. I mean, actually, we get
I
thousands of
think
work
we'll have
orders.
to
but-
see if there's a,
It'll take,
that might not be worth it. Well,
yeah. We'll
Gina, you talk with
I
Bill
was gonna
about
say,
that.
We'll talk about that one.
Thank
see
you.
What's feasible on Tuesday.
Yeah, well, I guess my thought would be if it's a question from the board, we should list it and we'll look at it. I guess I think the issue is what's the comparative advantage of that? I mean, self-insuring at a $400 item typically would not be recommended because of the insurance costs and all the rest. So I guess it's a question of, at $40 a unit, what's the return on that as opposed to, I don't want to sort of off-table figure out a question as opposed to, as a question you want answered, we'll try and figure out if we can answer it. I don't know how fast we can do that.
The question is, if you
And
multiply
if-
out by $40 times the number of devices we spent it on,
Yep.
minus the amount that we've spent on repairs, if it's a positive number, then it's in our favor, and it's a negative number, then we're making out with the warranty. But I just don't know how complicated it is to figure out what that.
All right, we'll take it as a question, see if we can answer it.
Okay.
And how long.
I mean, because if we're talking about over 1,000 units at $40 a piece, that's all of a sudden a significant amount in aggregate.
right.
Right. Right. And then what percentage roughly would you say of these costs are associated with misuse?
That's a good question for me and for Drew Walters, who's really the point person on this at the middle school. They are dropped, and often that's an accidental drop, or they're knocked off a desk. But it's hard. I don't believe we have children maliciously destroying their Chromebooks. However, the Chromebooks do the keys tend to pop off with some regularity. The hinges between the cover and the case, just from opening and closing them, they do. That seems to be a common problem also. So I don't know that we have the data either to actually give a real good answer to that, but we do discuss with every student if we suspect that it was a more than just an accident. And I think those numbers are very low.
Just to my knowledge, thinking from last year, there were very, very few where I felt it wasn't accidental, maybe 3.
Okay.
One had to do in his father's car and something occurred. They actually did reimburse us for that because it was completely, fault of the student. But again, there were maybe 3 where I spoke to the parent because I, truly felt it was on the child.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. Mr. Rizzo, I am so appreciative of you here in the district and the changes that you have brought forward to improve our system and the benefits for our students. I have a question, however, about the clinical BCBA supervision. And I'd love to know the certification of that person as opposed to something that you or Ms. King or anybody else would take on. I don't understand it enough.
Sure. Most likely that person would be a doctoral level BCBA. I mean, highly qualified person who supervises as part of her current position BCBAs and would extend that into the district.
Okay, but the BCBAs we have are certified themselves.
Correct.
Okay, so is this something that we could, maybe still for a cost, I don't know, connect with a graduate school of clinical psychology and somehow, I don't understand, I don't know enough.
Yeah. The level of supervision that we would get with this particular investment would be far beyond what something like that might be able to provide.
And what kind of FTE are we talking about?
Well, it's not an FTE, it's
not,
through
it's just an
consulting.
hourly
Right,
consultant.
correct, which there's a couple of pieces of that. One, there is an offset in that account to help achieve this. Secondly, it is not an FTE, and that was a
Yeah,
thoughtful,
okay.
planful decision. The intent of the supervision is to enable our staff to meet the needs of our students. We have many students who receive programs through outside contracted services. By providing the supervision and building the capacity, the idea would be over time to shift that responsibility back to our district staff rather than having to continue to contract for those services outside.
Okay, I accept it, thank you.
Thank you.
On that line, Dr. Kroll, the connection that we have currently with Teachers College has nothing to do, this is new and science-based, or is this around the standards?
This
our
is-
association with Teachers
Yeah,
College
our
was finished at one point, so.
Columbia University Teachers College has been a continuing partnership for writing previously, and now we're in the midst of our reading initiative with Teachers College. This is not having to do with science.
Thank you.
Mike, I have a question for you. Help me understand, how are we positioned in your area for special ed versus other districts? Because when I look at I'm just on page 155, your budget line. There's an 8.2% increase coming from your world. It's approximately 700,000. I know we cannot look at, I know that the spend per student is higher in this area, and I know that we typically, it's not the right thing to look at the spend per student because overhead is overhead is overhead. But how do we compare versus other districts is my first question. And my second question is, at some point, when we add on consulting and legal and tuition, at some point, are we double or triple padding ourselves in there? Or is it baseline that we need to actually have it at all times? I just want to understand.
Sure. Can I just ask for a little bit of clarification on the first part of your question? So I could draw some comparisons in a variety of ways. Is there something specific?
How does Weston position themselves in this area versus other districts?
Related to staffing, related to services, related to, I mean, I can talk about all of them, I just don't want to.
Please, and just in general, overall.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so from a staffing perspective, I believe that we are well-staffed. We have many excellent professionals across the district. Just from my experience, when we've talked a little bit about this, and when I look at some of the tuition and some of the legal agreements that we have, I think that there's room to be more efficient in those, and I think that's some of that's the work that we're doing, and what some of these investments are really targeting. I think from the services we provide in terms of what we're able to offer on a continuum, I think is very comparable and excellent. I mean, we have a wide range of services within this district, ranging from much more restrictive environments for students who require that to very, very inclusive environments, students who receive almost all of their special education services within the regular education classroom with the teacher pushing into that regular ed classroom. So there's a wide range, there is a continuum. We of course need to continue to develop the skills in which we meet those student needs. That's why you see the increase in the professional development. Mm-hmm. There are skills, there is emerging research in the area of speech and language, for example. In the area of communication devices and things like that will better enable us to meet the needs of our students. So those are areas for continued growth. It's not that we're coming from a deficit, it's an area that we need to really stay ahead of the curve on. That's the first part, and I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
And then the second question is, if we're adding, kind of funds in all of these areas, like consulting, like professional development,
right,
legal, et cetera, are we double padding ourselves? Because I would hope if we are adding this great professional development, I would see maybe something else go down.
Yeah, over time, that would be the hope and the expectation over time, but that will take several years. I do not believe we are double padding. When Rich and I have analyzed the tuition costs, we're going student by student, looking at where is that student now, what is the cost of the programming for that student, and what can we expect next year with our best reasonable estimation at this point. When we look at the costs of the legal representation, frankly, I think that account has been underutilized in the past, and I think we need to take a different approach, and we've talked a little bit about that approach. So is there a relationship between those two accounts? Yes, there is, but not always directly. So obviously the legal representation comes more into play when there are due process proceedings and things like that, versus the tuition account can also apply to students that the district believes need to be placed out of district in a different school to have their IEP goals and objectives met. So there's some correlation between those two, but it's maybe not as direct as one might think.
So just, we're kind of focusing on continuing to support the investment we made
Mhm.
last year.
Mm-hmm.
You requested the BA supervision in part to augment the skill set of our staff.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an idea of what's next at this point? Is this get you to a certain point where you need more time to evaluate where you are and then readdress needs? I mean, you've only been here 6 months, Mike. I mean,
Yeah, no, I have a plan. So there are areas to continue to grow on, and Dr. McCursey and the entire cabinet have, I've bounced these ideas off people and we've discussed it. There are, for example, if I think about the work that our psychologists do, we could provide the same kind of clinical supervision for them that we may be doing for the BCBAs. It's a different skill set that goes beyond the educational nature of counseling. It gets into the much more clinical basis for things. And what that does is it enables the school teams to get better data about students' performance, present levels of performance, and then design better programs. Now, I believe that there's work that we can do without that at this point to continue our own growth. But when I think that we're ready, I will come to this board as part of a budget after discussing it with everybody, and I'll present that case. The reason why I'm bringing the BCBA forward right now is because I think there's a lot of bang that we can get out of that very calculated investment at this point, because it's going to reach not only the BCBAs, it's going to reach the teams on which they work as multidisciplinary teams, it's going to reach the paraprofessionals, the non-certified staff that are working with our students, and potentially has the ability to reach families into some of those home programs. So I think by starting there, we're providing a lot of strength to the district.
A little context, if I may. I mean, the superintendents sit in the privacy of the times we sit monthly, and then actually one was not so private, but it was that legislative breakfast with the board chairs and superintendents with the newly elected legislative leaders. This is the greatest area of opportunity and also the greatest challenge. So where we're seeing the stresses and the challenges of meeting all the needs of students, many, with some real complex challenges, this is budgetarily the most volatile. It's the area most tied down in working within a legal framework. You'd like to have the relationships not going to a legal context, but rightly so, there are a set of legal rights, federally driven, for those students once IDA identified, and if we're not meeting what we should, those families have full right to take a legal approach. That doesn't happen with other students. So I think what Mike has done here prior to getting here in the interview process, but then once getting here, is to say, great district, frankly, it was too much work for too few people. And you start to see the stress points on the quality interventions, the quality of interactions. By law, we have to do child find. If we are not identifying students early enough, we put ourselves at risk for the child and the family, but also legally and financially. So that's not anyone doing wrong, just too much work for too few people. And so the strategic approach is really almost the elements you've raised to say those all complement are essential. So the administrative work, and Mike spoke to a little bit in the opening, we can now point 6 months in with the assistant super, the assistant director level, we can point to a good number of individuals where we've kept them in district longer, or we're heading off that out-of-district moment. Or if families get to that, we can have a better conversation. We are not perfect, but we are getting better at that. So that oversight matters. That support for teachers matters. But then the professional development is critical. It's a highly technical, highly complicated area, changing rapidly. So it's necessary to provide that professional development. So that's the other piece. So the administrative piece ties in with professional development. The legal piece, we had great legal representation, but I think we're even a little better place at this point. And we're looking at how to make that as supportive as possible for the students. But that fits in, but it's not redundant at all. And I think the BCBA identification is, we knew that most of our outplacements were tied to behavioral and emotional challenges. So that was the move to bring the BCBA. I think Mike's looking is to say, good team, good work, but how do we provide them, which is highly technical supervision, and not bring someone in, but do that through a consulting relationship, which gives us more flexibility to do that. But this, I say this with great admiration for any student we have, but this is that most volatile area we have. And so I think it's, and we've seen gains. We have seen gains that will take us a while, but that's, I think, where we actually been very efficient in this part of the budget. I don't know if that context helps or not.
To follow up on that, and just a clarification question, I suspect I know the answer, but it has to be asked. Do we currently have anyone on staff with the skill set necessary to serve in that capacity?
No,
Okay.
we don't. And I also just want to build on it, because I think that was very well said. I want to just build on, not only are these two assistant director positions in my position, our building administrators have taken on an increasingly important role in the special education work that we're doing, and the people services work that we're doing, and that should be recognized publicly, because we've had an opportunity, because of the structure, to provide more professional development to our administrative staff as well. And not only have have they taken to that? But people are running with it. They're asking great questions, and we are improving our game around, in every building, which is wonderful to see. It's very, very exciting.
Staying on this topic and staying with you, Mike, and this might bring Rich into the fold. I always have a question when I look at budget line items. I understand that a budget is essentially a projection, but some things are more real than others. And on page 159, you have a $5,000 allowance for new student needs for special education software, and you have $12,500 allowance for new student needs for assistive technology equipment. Is that an anticipated need, or is that, for lack of a better term, a placeholder for what could happen in the future? So do we have...
So it's typically what we see each year. Each year there are apps, for example, that are requested in PPTs that count towards the software or software programs, typing type of programs. The allowance for student needs for technology equipment could be anything from hearing devices to Chromebooks to iPads. It could be a variety of items. We typically see in that range of spend each year.
Just because, from a percentage standpoint, the allowance is very high. It's 16% on technology, and it's almost 33%. It's more than 33% on, I'm sorry, 16% on software and 33% on technology. So if we're not spending that money now, I'm not suggesting for a second that we don't supply students with what they need, but I'm wondering if that's something that we could safely pare that number down and then look for the money should the need arise, and if the need doesn't arise, we didn't budget for something that didn't happen.
It's a hit or miss category. I mean, the reason the equipment's higher is it just costs more. It's largely why that number.
Right, but
is
we don't have a single expenditure that totals that amount. So you see what I'm saying? So there's no line item within that realm that if a need were to arise for specific technology, nothing that we're utilizing right now comes close to hitting that number.
Yeah, I appreciate your question, Dan, and what I'd like to do is just to work with Rich a little bit closer on that and see if there's anything. I know that I've been working with a couple of the schools about some students who will be transitioning, and I do anticipate that there may be some equipment needs and technology needs that could be substantial. And as Rich said, the other area specifically is around hearing devices, FM systems and things like that. Not one of them would equal that by itself, but a couple of them would.
Right, and if we have, I want to be careful here, but if we know that these things are going to come into play next year, then I'd love to see them in the budget. But any excess for anticipated needs, I would like to maybe see that differentiated so we can make a decision on those lines.
Yeah,
So it's unlikely you'll have none of those. You'll have something happen. You've never had a year where you had nothing.
But I do think that it gets to Ruby's question. Gets to Ruby's question, sorry, as well, which is this is an area where, because it's has a potential of being highly volatile, it's one where we really need to think closely about how much unanticipated, how much projection how much forecasting we do, because it could be something where we can kind of play through a little bit, and if we do find that we kind of missed the mark, we can always, like we've done in the past, we can always kind of find the money.
Yeah, I guess I now have enough history to be informed for Weston. I would think really hard about that, and I would go back to that overage slides that Rich showed in terms of, this is not a comment on the wonderful students we have in the district. This is about a financial reality that we've been dealing with, which in many ways I'm separating, because we have parents in this audience right now whose children I'm, in a sense, talking about.
Right.
So I'm not talking about the children, I'm talking about staff, but we were at an overage that, we want to talk about a comparison, in crisis. No other area district per capita was looking at the overage we've had and that running rate. But only last year did we go for a supplemental The previous year, we were able to absorb it, and I think that's because we've run the numbers so tightly and carefully relative to historic patterns in those other areas of SPED PPS that as we hit that, we're able to say, let's bring some of that money over. So my point is, I would urge the board to think very carefully about saying, let's find a savings somewhere else within the SPED PPS budget because we don't think we'll need it, as opposed to let's go outside of PPS and SPED if you have to. And I don't know, Rich, you might want to elaborate on that because, I mean, as you heard Rich say, we've not had a year when you haven't needed it. And
It's true, Bill, but
So-
the one thing is that there's not a lot of places to go, right? And so let's be careful about making real cuts versus something where we're forecasting. So I think
Well,
but I guess, again, it's forecasting based on very solid historic information year to year.
So if
knowing
we were
and-
to
Yeah, go
cover
ahead.
it through transfers, you're probably taking it from facilities, or you're probably freezing accounts.
But I guess just for clarification, Rich, in this year's budget, the 3.1 million change that we have, that is based on current students, and then we have some bucket for anticipated future students who may need services. Approximately, what is that bucket, just so we can
So we
evaluate?
put in $380,000. It is unlikely that that will be the number by the end of the month. That number will probably be less as it will be drawn down off on. If we recall, we did the same number last year. Before the Board of Finance voted, that number was 0. So one of the reasons we do have a shortfall this year is that allowance isn't necessarily an allowance for next year. It has to carry you from today through June 30th of the following year. So we started this year, we did a budget back in December. We assumed 380 before the year, even before Mike even walked in the door, that number was 0.
Again, so why is a number
So we,
straddling two different budget years?
so we budget to the student. We have the list of the students who are outplaced, the location that they're outplaced, the agreement, the cost. So if you have an individual who gets outplaced, let's say today, and we built this budget, back in December, that's a new cost. So what
Right.
you're doing is now you have an overage for this current fiscal year,
And
and
the
then next fiscal year, you're taking that 380, and let's say that cost is $80,000. You really have 300,000 as an allowance because now you have a new student added to that list.
Okay, I understand that, and I understand the steps that we took in last year's budget about being probably more realistic. I know we ran a series of overages year after year, and you can only do the same thing so many times before wanting to make a change, and we did make that change. I wonder if this year, if I'm understanding this correctly, the proposed amount is 3.135 million, and our actual spend, all things considered, is 3.03 million. So this budget year 20, is going to be the first year historically that we budget in excess of what our known costs to be, juxtaposed against a track record of budgeting under what our costs are going to be.
So we don't have students aging out next year, which is essentially the reason we're doing it. So when we looked at last year, we had a couple of students who aged out. They did age out. They left. They were just replaced by new students.
Okay, so let's say we keep that number exactly the same. Our spend this year is projected to be 3.03 million. Let's say that's the number in the budget next year. What are the odds we're going for a supplemental appropriation because we've gone over that number?
Largely depends on if there are, settlements or outplacements or.
That's the problem.
On a proactive side of that, we are also working with students in these placements to try and bring them back to district. So when we do that, then that feeds back into that number that may have started at 380. So it's a
This seems to me to be now that we've got in line, right? So we've looked at a series of budget years where we're consistently under budgeting by 300, 400, 500,000 and going against shortfalls. We're in the right ballpark now, at least with this number. But I would draw in my mind a parallel to the contingency teacher position that we had in this historically, Mike, in the budget. We would have 1 or 2 contingency teachers that were unassigned based on anticipated increases in enrollment and have those teachers allocated. That's been a practice that has not succeeded in the past, and it's also been, through conversations with the other boards in town, a practice that we've eliminated. The parallel almost seems the same to me here, to try and over budget. It seems like you're budgeting that contingency teacher, but just in this other
So I think the
area.
difference is you have never had a year when you have not used that allowance for outplacements.
But
Never.
we've also never had a year where we've over budgeted current year's expenses.
True.
But it might be worth a check back. I don't know if the records allow it, but I mean, the point Rich shared is very important. One reason this year or not is because this is based on relationships, as you know, with individual students, and that's different than the rest of how you budget a public school district, that you don't have that aging out this year, which is a factor in why you have the number you do. We're making gains here in 6 months, 7 months. Any move by an organization to make a transition 6, 7 months in, you don't suddenly, I mean, I think we have to do everything we can to let this keep moving, so that this truly allows us to be really do all we can for those students who need that help, and also then for the entire district. So again, we scoured the budget. We were very thorough, and we'll be thorough as you ask us. My hunch is this is not an area we're going to come back to you. If you say, bring us back some recommended cuts, we're not going to go here, is my hunch. Because it is so important that we get back to a very high level of functioning in this area. Again, it was too much work for too few people. We have a much higher outplacement rate unilateral than most other districts. Just that 1.6 million overage. I mean, nobody around here had that kind of issue. And again, good people doing good work, but just too much of it. So that's why we're saying, as we think about this budget going into next year, it's trying to keep that momentum, keep that work going, so that we really are working this.
Yeah, and I want to be very
context comment at the legislative breakfast, not this district. A board chair saying, I am so afraid that this issue will tear apart our district. I am so afraid that what's happening to meet the needs of our children that need that, we will then get an us-them. And we've gotten some flavors of that in Weston. We're trying to avoid that. And so I think we're on a path to be there for those students who need it and for all our students. So that's you're hearing some passion from me on this one. Because if you say, Bill, you and your team have got to come back with some reductions, my hunch is for the total student here, we may not come back here, because we say we got to let this keep moving, so we don't end up in that place where that other district is, a very good district, saying, and Gina, you were in the room, and if I'm being clear.
no, and I appreciate that. And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that this is not important. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't fully fund special education and pupil and personnel services, and not only meet the legal obligations, but the moral and ethical obligations that are before us. For me, it's just the way we go about it. And I personally am not against being a little more tight with the budgeting for this, knowing that there are avenues that we can go to that I don't think would necessarily tear at the fabric of this district or cause, I mean, the option for a supplemental appropriation in this town exists. It has been used for this very purpose in the past. It has gone relatively smoothly. And so I think that, yes, but understanding that, I want to be clear. This isn't about the cost center or not spending the money. It's the way we go about budgeting for it.
I would say I would ask, is it fair for us to say, can you review the 380 based on your detailed information? Is that still the number, or has it's still the number? Okay. Another question I want to ask about this, Mike. I know the answer, but I just want to ask the question so that anybody else looking at
hope I
this
get it
page won't get it confused. On 161, where we have like the number of students by grade,
Yes.
if somebody's looking at out-of-district placements and agreements, for our senior class this year, and then they look at the senior class next year, that people are gonna be like, whoa, what's going on?
Yep.
We provide services for certain students until the age of 21,
Correct.
and they sit in that 12th year bucket.
Yes.
So somebody looking at this is not a mistake, this is us providing the continuum of services for our higher need children.
100% correct, and it was verified again today.
Thank you. I just,
Yeah.
so that people who might be looking
Yeah.
at this wouldn't be questioning why we have that bucket still sitting there.
For point of clarification, Rich, can you speak to the, I've heard the number 380,000 put out there a couple times. Can you speak to that number and what the genesis of that number is and where it's located? And
So it's essentially our 4.5 multiple. So excess cost, which is the reimbursement we get from the state of Connecticut, you receive in excess of 4.5 times your per pupil. So for us, it's a little over $90,000. So we're assuming 4 placements. Excess cost works if you spend $90,000. You're supposed to get reimbursed 100% of whatever you spend above, let's say, that $90,000. The state doesn't have any money, and they haven't had it for a while, so they actually put an entitlement cap on it. So rather than giving you 100% of the excess over 90, they essentially give you 72.5 cents on the dollar.
And so this line item, the 3.1 million, does that include the 380,000 for anticipated outplacements?
Yes.
I'll just offer one other piece of context, Dan, and I appreciate your question, and I really understand where you're coming from with it. I went recently to a breakfast, area districts on a consortium idea about districts contributing to a fund on a statewide level that would, the concept was that it would, if everyone contributes, it would balance the cost of special education in districts by using the law of large numbers. And to me, with my background, that was like, okay, that's an interesting idea. Everybody in the room with a financial background said that is a terrible idea. And the main reason essentially was that nobody ever has a good year when it comes to these things. So it's based on the concept of, we have a good year, somebody else has a bad year, the money comes together and meets in the middle and pays the, everybody was dead set against it. Very concerned. Members of boards of finance from various districts, boards of ed, superintendents were speaking out against it. Now, that may or may not actually come to fruition. I mean, they may do that regardless of the feedback they received. But essentially, the understanding was those unanticipated costs are always there, and they're there by everybody, and that's why that would not work. So I understand your question about, is that number the right number for this budget? Understood, and I think Rich believes that it is, and I agree with him. But just for a context, I mean, that's the kind of the way other districts are looking at it too.
Okay. And one follow-up question that might actually contradict everything that I just said, which is always fun. So if our actual spend this year is $3,030,000, and we're anticipating 4 outplacements, and there's nobody aging out of the program, then isn't the projected actual spend 3.41 million? Isn't it the 3,030,000 plus the 380 anticipated?
No, so you have some contracts, the way that they're structured, where your payments are front-loaded, and then you have like a drop-off in payments that account for a number of years. So you might end up paying $100,000 in the first year, but then in the second year you're paying, let's say, $50,000. So that all plays a part in how the contracts are structured, because they're not necessarily 1 year at a time.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I was just saying, anything else, since we kind of be focusing on special ed, anything else in special ed? I would like for us to now spin to the capital budget, because we haven't really talked about it at all. It's getting close to 9 o'clock. We haven't really talked about it at all. The other areas we've kind of hit on in a couple different buckets. We can always come back to them Tuesday if you still have questions. I'm not saying you can't continue to ask, but just we really haven't talked about the capital budget as a group yet. So I kind of want to get to that tonight, since we have had no conversation about it. So, Dan, you're looking very ready to go.
Well, because I have a lead into that before we get to the actual line items on the capital budget.
Okay.
Rich, my question for you is, some of these things that I'm seeing in the operating budget, they almost look to me like they could be in either place with regards to the boiler repairs and replacements and the roof repairs and partial replacements. What's the determining factor for whether that shows up in operating or
So
capital?
repairs are not capital items. It's considered like routine maintenance. Typically, a capital item is a new item. It's an asset that maybe has a depreciating value. So the boiler maintenance or parts, things like that, while they might be a new motor, it's going into an old system. It's essentially repair work. If we looked at the presentation, that rotted out pipe, for example, that we saw, some of that work is a new pipe, things like that.
So, and I've been in on every meeting, so I still have questions. And things that I'd like to point out. Item 3, which is removing the oil tanks but not replacing them, loses us the dual fuel capability of heating our schools. I just want to say that, because I think that
So the middle school and high school won't
middle
have
school and
that.
high school, does this affect the high school as an emergency center for the town?
If natural gas lines were to be compromised, then you wouldn't have heat.
So I think that, okay. I have several things that I question myself, and one of those is the town gown streetlights. I think it's the wrong time to do that. So I would take that $20,000. I would offer that that is up for grabs. I also believe that the item number 7, which is the addressing of the roof leaks that we had already previously requested from the Board of Finance. And the difference, there's a concrete repair in there. And that concrete repair, we believe, should potentially go back to the town as a design flaw. And so I would offer that there's a $21,000 differential there that we should not have in here at this point. And I hate to say it, and I understand the aesthetics, and I understand the use, and I have had middle schoolers myself, but I do not think this is the time for $185,000 worth of middle school lockers, in light of, only because of the discussion around what might we use or envision this building for. So I could propose a $226,000 reduction.
So in terms of the
to this
roof,
budget.
you're not going to pay what you would have paid in November, so it's not quite, you can put in the exact amount that we would have requested in November.
I thought we were going to go for the special appropriation.
Well, that's part of the issue is, Rich, you can fill in the facts. We're being told, based on the time of year, the roofing company does not want to do the repair
So-
right now.
Till April.
So we asked, they said it would take them probably 2 to 3 weeks to mobilize and probably 3 to 4 weeks to do the work, weather dependent. They're not going to do the work in high wind, they're not going to do the work in the rain or the snow. They said if we were to give them notification, let's say, beginning of March, so if we were to ask for a supplemental, you go to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, let's say that's a February event, you were to let them know, okay, you have the go-ahead to do it in March, they would do the works probably sometime in mid-April.
Oh, so might as well
If,
do the budget.
if the budget were to get approved at referendum, which I think is May 2nd or May
Yes.
3rd, it's in that time range,
Okay.
you could issue a purchase order that Monday.
Right,
Yeah.
all right,
So you're
Fair
really
enough.
buying yourself a month.
fair enough.
I also want to reiterate the importance of items 1 and 2 on here. You have absolutely no control over the Xenon plant. You have to fix it, or
So-
schools are shut down, period.
Or for a
And
really gross reason.
the chiller at Hurlbut affects the entire atmosphere of the school.
I think for the public's edification, can we explain what the Xenon plant does?
So it's our.
And the
waste-
chiller. No,
it is-
seriously.
It is our waste system
It's
for
our waste
3 of the
management
schools.
system.
Well, I don't know that everybody in the
Um,
public
Right.
understands
I'm
that
sure
we
they do.
So
essentially
if
have a
it-
self-contained
If
sewer
it
system.
fails, you either have no bathrooms, you could potentially have to have trucks come out and pump waste 24/7. Joel Barlow had a failure at their Xenon plant, and they had trucks there pumping sewage around the clock,
At quite a cost.
quite a cost. So the chiller provides air conditioning to the main office, the library, essentially the core house of the building, and provides ventilation.
The nurses.
And
that's
it's
important.
been plastered and taped, and
Babied.
it's at its end
Yeah.
life. It's-
And some of those areas are the areas that are used for the classrooms that don't have air conditioning during those days, right? So if you lose the air conditioning in the LRC, that is your place that the teachers can bring their kids to.
It's your nurse's
It's
office.
the nurse's office.
Okay. Okay. Rich, I have a question on some of the Tier 2 items, specifically the replace South House boiler and piping and East House boiler, steam traps and controls. How much of the items in the operating budget for repairs and maintenance of boilers could be eliminated if we did this work now? Or are those separate systems?
Almost none of it. I
Okay.
mean, it would free up a significant amount of time for the maintenance staff. I mean, especially South House. If we look at our boilers, the boiler that's definitely in the worst shape in the district is South House. So that's definitely the boiler we want to do more work. It's probably the boiler that has the most patchwork done by a lot of the guys. But every year you're going to have to do maintenance on the boiler. Every year you have to tune it up to make sure that when you fire it up, you know, it's in good condition. And it's not like when you fire up a boiler at your house, you know, you feel the heat right away. I mean, they fire up the boiler, it could take a day before you actually feel anything going through the building.
So is there a savings offset of moving that from Tier 2 into Tier 1?
No.
Okay.
Back to the question about the oil tanks, particularly the one at the high school, that we would lose the dual fuel capability at one of the facilities in town that's dedicated in case there's some sort of emergency situation. Has the town been apprised of that, and do they understand the impact of that?
The selectmen and the town administrator, yes.
And what would be the cost if, just because of the nature of that building being used as an emergency center, if the decision was made that we needed to replace the oil tank so we can maintain that capability in
You'd
case
probably-
of an emergency?
You would probably need another $20,000 or so.
But it also has ongoing costs of the potential environmental damage, the constant, the constant.
I
need to
realize
test
that,
it,
but when you're
and
talking
we're the
ab-
only place in the country that has these. There, it is not. It is,
I understand that as far as replacing,
other places
every-
don't have it on
every
their
oil tank but
emergency
that one.
buildings either, though. That's what I'm saying. Is that we're acting like, oh, it's the emergency building. It needs to have an oil tank. Only in New England do people have oil tanks in their emergency buildings. This is not. It's.
Well,
not,
we are in New England.
I know, but other towns around don't too. Is what I'm saying. Is I know.
I'm
that
just
it's-
asking the
I'm just
question.
saying,
I'm
is
just,
it's-
just because of the nature of the
Oil
use of
tanks
that
are so
facility, if we have,
But the answer is another $20,000.
plus the ongoing perpetual
what's,
cost and risk.
what's the ongoing
We test
carrying cost?
we test the tanks every year.
Mhm.
I believe it's around $8,000 a year.
Mhm.
But it's not a, you know, per tank charge. This is your fleet
It's
of
a
tanks
system.
and this is what you pay.
Right, but 30 years from now, when we're all sitting around this table, that's going to show up in the budget again when we have to pull them out,
That's right.
to the tune of $60,000 apiece.
No, I got that. I got that.
$100,000 a year.
And you have to keep them filled,
Yep.
and we're not using it, and then you have to burn it off when you're not using it, and it's not.
So lockers. Mr. Doak.
Make your case.
What I can tell you is that we have an increasing number of lockers that just don't function. We have kick-open lockers that you don't even have to use the combination. You kick it or you pull on it and it opens. It's been a challenge again. It becomes a situation where the kids aren't even able to store their belongings in the lockers, especially the biggest problem probably is in the 6th grade wing, where the lockers are smaller. As you get to the 8th grade wing, I think if we had to pare this number down, this is for replacing all the lockers to go to a different style of locker. We have different styles already. The 6th and 7th grade lockers are very different from the 8th grade lockers, which are a little bit larger, and we have more lockers in that area of the building to choose from when we have to reassign lockers when we find out they're not working. But really, I think there's a critical need in the 6th grade. If I had to prioritize, I would really prioritize the 6th grade wing of the building. And we could look at what that would cost if it was just one section and not the entire building. I'm looking at Mr. Walters again because he deals a lot with this.
With 6th grade, I'm basically out. I've had custodians repair these throughout the years. This is my 6th year, and they're somewhere. They're just so worn, and the latches and with the little hard plastic that it latches on, it's so worn out that many are beyond repair. There are students that during the school year, it becomes, we call them full open
challenge is when we have new students joining us during the school year, just speaking to sixth grade, it's a struggle for me to find a workable locker. Seventh grade, still a challenge. Eighth grade, again, they're in much better shape. They are newer.
They're different.
It's a newer section of the building,
Right.
and we do have many more available in that area.
And there is a cascading effect. When you don't have working lockers, you start to have discipline problems. You have students going in and out of other people's lockers, sharing a common locker because it doesn't need a combination. It's a pull open or it's a kick open. You have students' belongings that aren't fitting in the lockers. So you walk the halls between periods and constantly lockers are not only open, but students' belongings are on the floor. Chromebooks are on the floor. To me, that's a tripping hazard as well. So I really do think there is a critical need. Does it need to be $185,000 for the entire building? That's a fair question.
I would like to see the answer to that question.
Yeah, let me, this, we had talked about this at the workshop. I mean, Dan's answered very well, but this is a superintendent level decision as much as anywhere. The lockers become most of the walls in this building. This is a beautiful space. Many other aspects of this building are beautiful space. I'm going to repeat myself. Other aspects of this building are so far below what they should be. And we're trying to get to a place to fix this building, get it better, but that's 4 or 5 years down the road. We're not sure exactly what's going to happen. And so I was quite willing to see this large amount in here as a way to help with the quality of life in a building. At least since I've been here, we've been pulling back any investment in the building, saying at some point we're going to do something different with this building. I'm in my 3rd year, and we're still looking at maybe 4 or 5 years down the road before we know what we'll do. And so that's been the concern. 180 is a big number in our modest capital budgets. But the feeling was for this building, for all the reasons Dan has talked about, the quality of life, the culture, all the rest, this we thought was a way to get at some things. We don't have the money to do the air conditioning. We don't have the money to deal with the science labs. We don't have the money to deal with a few other things in this building that frankly are bigger quality of life issues.
The bathrooms.
The bathrooms are a very serious issue. We don't have the money for that. So this was an attempt to say in this building, is there a way to do something? I don't know if these lockers are movable. Conceivably, you could then use them later. Conceivably, 4 or 5 years down the road, maybe not. But again, it's an attempt to do something for this building that's needed. I don't know if that's a...
I thought we were told that they probably would not be able to be moved and reused, which I'm just saying that we did have that discussion.
So the one, we were asked whether or not we can move the high school rooms here. The answer to that is no. It would be too costly, and a lot of them, whether or not they'd actually make it when you transport them over is questionable. Whether or not if you put these lockers in 5 years from now you wanted to move them to somewhere else, it will largely depend on how, kind of shape they're in 5 years from now. Are they maintained well and treated well, and are they damaged or not? So it's really, it could go either way.
I just want to underscore also, I think the difference that it would make in the climate and culture of the school. I visited a school in South Orangetown, a fellow tri-state district, and they had just done a renovation of their middle school, and they could chart the improvements, the fewer discipline referrals. The students felt like they were given respect to their part of the building. And I think right now our students, it's like Bill said, it's not attractive, it's not functional, it's really not up to the Weston standard, and we've been limping along in many areas of the school, and this is just one of those areas that directly affects students several times a day.
And then, just on the streetlight upgrade, that really is a town project. And they've asked for a portion. Why is this portion why are we being asked to reflect this portion on our capital budget? Because once it goes to the town, is it going to be one number?
It will be one number, and once we see the town's number, it would get adjusted based on whatever that total ask is. So it might not end up actually being the 20. It could be 10, it could be a portion of it, it could be none of it, it'll be one line item.
Could it be 30?
It could be. It really, it'll be one line item at referendum that people will vote for. So we put it in based on the proposal that, you know, the town administrator had shared with us and the discussions we had with him. But we aren't privy to see what they put forward yet. I don't believe their budget's actually out yet. So when it is, and there was also, obviously there was no capital committee either this year. So once that's out, that number will probably be, you know, flushed out, depending on what they put out.
Why is
So-
this so?
Well, yeah, so I guess we need to get some further feedback from the town side. I guess where I'm going with it, I don't really think that there's anything we need to approve or not approve, because it's essentially a town project. And when
They're
it
asking
goes
us
to
for
the,
money.
well, no, when it goes to the town, it's gonna be one number on the capital
They
budget.
want it to come out of our ledgers, our side of the ledger.
There's no our side of the ledger
So the
on
capital budget's technically all their
No,
ledger.
Yeah.
It's still on, it's
Um,
still on paper.
Well,
Then why is it here?
yeah.
Well, to show that, so there was
It shows
appeal to do a
the-
joint town Board of Ed project, considering the Board of Ed would have a part in it. You know, we're obligated to show you what that is.
What is our part, though? I thought all the lights were town lights, so what is our part in it?
Good question.
Just that it's on school road.
Why is this important now?
This is us trying to be good citizens, so we
Okay.
would agree with all your
I get
questions,
it.
so let me
And you
just cut to
understand
the.
the questions
They're
are
all
honest
excellent questions.
They're
We
honest
completely
questions.
support the tenor and direction of your questions. We were attempting just to be good partners
Right.
and citizens at the administrative level, but
And-
we are fully supportive of the
And
line of
that's
your questions.
appreciated. But when it comes right down to it, we're gonna have to be good presenters of our needs. And the LED lights in the streetlights, in my opinion, are far under even lockers.
Well, I think,
I do
Let
like
me,
the idea.
to use a phrase in my admissions days, I don't think we'll go to the mat for this one.
No, okay.
well, we,
Let it go.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, we will need to vote on these items, but when it gets to the town, this is gonna get folded into their project. What information do we need to be able to vote to at least pass this to get it into the town process? So we can get that information.
Why is
What
this,
do we-
why is this important now, as opposed to, I mean, this isn't, it's not like we don't have light in a place that we need light. We're converting to LED lights, which I get all the benefits of LED lights, but it's an upfront cost with an 8-year return. Why is this important now? In what's going to be an incredibly difficult budget year?
Should we?
And that's not a judgment question, it's an informational question.
No, I
mean,
agree with that. I'm just
I
wondering if we
we can make it very simple. We can get back to Jonathan and say,
We
at the
can,
board meeting, there have been a number of questions about the timing and purpose. Could you help us answer that?
I'm
We
just
can,
wondering,
we
should
could
we
also
ask
have the
them?
option of removing it, and then when it comes up, just say we are generally supportive of it, and see what the town decides to do.
So you'll have those conversations?
Yeah, I think in the fairness of being good partners on this with the town, I think it would be logical for us to go back to Jonathan and say, in this meeting, this evening, there were a set of questions from the board about the purpose and timing of this relative to the other priorities that we face.
Great.
That would be appreciated.
And that we could bring you that answer, and then you can deliberate further. Is that?
Moving on. Rich, line item 8, refurbishment of the gym floor in North House. Could you speak specifically to why that needs to be replaced, and then why now?
So it's an aging floor. It was one of the items flagged in Hurlbut from the Phase 1 facility study. The floor is not in the greatest of shape. Ideally, you would want to repair it. It is ranked 8th for that reason, but the floor does have to be, refurbished at some point in the near future.
Is there a safety concern now if it were left as is?
I guess I would defer that to Laura.
Does the
Right.
floor not ripple? Does the floor have a undulation to it? Or,
I mean, again, Laura, go ahead, and then no, please. Go. I'm going to back you up. Go, start.
Laura, mic, please.
There we go. It does need to be refurbished. Can it wait a year? I think that's, we keep pushing it off, but it's, we have the youngest children who are, learning how to use their bodies and control their bodies, so a quality gym floor, I think, is important. I don't know if Kim wants to chime in. She's a
It was replaced many, many years ago. I can't even tell you how many years ago when we had, senior center wasn't there and they redid both floors. It's just very worn. The texture is not there anymore. It's worn out.
Yeah,
It was also a floating floor, so there might be more to do with that.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking.
Ellen, I think when you asked about the rippling,
I think-
that was the cafeteria floor. That is a little,
No,
but-
there's something in my mind that
Yeah.
tells me that there's some
One of the high school,
not level.
one of the high school gym floors.
No,
has-
in the north house at the edges.
I mean, again, I think while this is a specific building, there's a district-wide value to this. I mean, the upkeep and care of our buildings is a very high level. We have some leaks and issues like that we rightly are concerned about, 9 at WIS and others, and given what's going on with area districts, we should be very worried about water getting into our buildings. Again, think Greenwich, think Westport, think Stanford. Subpar, we've talked about issues here. I'm just being direct and open and honest. That is another subpar part. Thank goodness we have an incredible gym teacher there who's about as tall as that room he works in. And I've been in there a lot, because watching him work in a subpar space, every time I walk in there, I go, thank goodness he brings spirit and joy to this work, because that is a subpar space. And it's actively used. It's children's introduction to our district. It's introduction to sort of the facilities and all we have. For $28,000, if that's the price, I think there's a big value add on this, is what I would say.
I want to go back to the number 7, the roof situation. If we anticipate the repairs at WIS to be above the 42,000 mark just because of the passage of time, that's shrinking into the amount allocated for the concrete portico repair. What sort of planning and initial design work has been done for that repair for us to know that we have enough in here?
So it does not involve design work. It's just to
Okay.
repair the portions that are essentially pushing into the roof and causing the leaks. It would have to be done by a mason. One of the reasons why we didn't bring that forward, apart from the fact that there was not that much money available in the knee wall project, was the firm who did the work, Silktown, was not willing to give any cost proposal at that time until a mason looked at it. Even the number, which is roughly about $20,000, $21,000, is still a ballpark estimate from them. They were not willing to give us a concrete estimate until the spring.
Any other capital questions? Okay. How late in the morning do you want to go?
That's your druthers. They're looking at me saying, please, let me go home. Some of us will be up at 4 a.m. checking for snow,
Well,
but
that's,
Yeah, that's a good.
it's really your druthers. I mean, we're on a tight timeline. We have, you as a board have some serious deliberations. I think really, Gina, that's your call. I think at this point, I might let that group go, just so they like me later. And Matt volunteered to get up at 4 in the morning and check, right? You gonna do that, Matt? Thank you, sir. All right, but I might, but I would urge, you need to decide how long you
I
want to go.
just, I know people, I think part of it is I feel I need to digest some of the materials that
I
came
still have
back.
a few more questions that I
still-
could ask them.
Does anybody have that question that you got to get answered tonight? Or I just kind of feel like we're at a good breaking point for
I'm done
everybody
for
to take a step back,
Yeah, I might ask,
revisit.
though, sorry.
Yeah, and revisit and recollect and then come back on Tuesday? Yes.
We do need a bit of guidance.
Mhm.
If you're of the druthers at 4.32 is the increase, but if you're thinking in another way, because, We are not here Monday. We should not be here Monday in honor of Dr. King. We are doing our homework in case you ask for some help in thinking about reductions, but we meet Tuesday with you for 90 minutes, 6 to 7:30. You then are scheduled to vote on Thursday, which you could change that, not by much, but you could. So it's just looking for some guidance. You may not be ready to provide that at this point, but you know, that might be, if you'd rather just think some more, but just, we're trying to not get into the 11th hour without bringing you back some information, if I'm being clear.
Yeah. I do have a question along those lines, Bill. With the current staffing proposal, we are set to go up net 1 FTE K-5. Are we going to be hiring to fill that position as projected, or is that going to be filled with staff movement?
That will be dependent on, we do have some people on leave currently, and we expect those decisions in terms of whether they be returning in early February. So we will not necessarily have that information as part of this process. I don't know if Patty or Laura want to.
So, board, I'm looking at you guys. I feel like we need to ask to see.
Yeah, I think we need to digest, but certainly, I feel that we would need to see if there was
What the options.
reductions, where would they be, and what would the impact be, so that we can assess ultimately how we feel about potential impact on the district if we actually had to make some further reductions from here.
Ruby, you feel the way?
Well, I mean, to be clear on what we're saying here is, and for the large amounts of audience members that were at the budget workshop last week, I kind of said this in my closing comments, is based on the budget that's been presented to us, and we've addressed the fact that all the efficiencies have kind of been found. We've bid everything that can be bid. We've reduced everything that can be reduced. Any conversation from this point forward is going to be a conversation about our district, the kinds of programs, the variety of programs, the depth of programs that we offer, and whether or not that is in our future. So, I mean, tonight was a lot of questions about some line items and trim a little here, trim a little there, find some minor efficiencies, purchase a little less. But ultimately, anything that we're going to be talking about from this point forward is taking a look at the Weston school system, how it exists today, and what it is going to exist as next year. And I think Bill spoke to that in his presentation and in the question and answer page. So that's beyond budget. That's a fundamental discussion about education in this town, and I think that
I agree. I mean, I agree with that, Dan. I think that it is incumbent upon us, though, to do that evaluation. I mean, we have to. We have to keep in mind that less than half of the homes in this town, I think it's between 30 and 40% of them, have children in these schools. But yet everybody pays taxes, and we have to balance the desire, the need to maintain our excellence with the realities of, the financial demands that it has on the town. And we have to go through the evaluation. Just because we look at the list does not mean that we're going to make the choice. As I said at one point, it could be that it allows us a chance to reaffirm our commitment to something. But I think that it's our duty to the taxpayers to at least have that conversation and that evaluation. And I also think it's healthy for the district for us to take a critical look at the programming that we're offering. Just because we're looking at it and discussing it doesn't mean it's a no. It just means that we're providing our role as oversight to evaluate if a program that went into place 10 years ago, is that program still effective? Is that program still what makes our district so special? I think all of us are committed to keeping this district to being the jewel in the town of Weston. But I do think we have to bring a critical eye to it for the benefit of the town for other reasons.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say that Dan, you're saying that everything we discuss from here on out is dramatic, drastic changes, and that's not necessarily true. Our agreement earlier today was that we were asking questions today, not discussing things that we thought in here needed to be cut that were not necessarily large programmatic changes. So I disagree with what you're saying.
Okay.
That's not,
But,
I mean,
you know-
I haven't brought up the things in here that I think need to be cut down that aren't
This-
necessarily on Bill's list, so.
This also, you know, this is not a conversation that's just a this year conversation. This is gonna be I mean, we're at the point where this is a recurring conversation every year. And I can't see how next year the conversation isn't gonna be similar to this year or the year after, which is ultimately going to lead to, I think, what you said, the conversations to be going to be more difficult, right? And I think we do need to see what the impact is, because I think we're going to have to weigh that balance. And I don't think that's going to go away. It's this year, next year, and for the foreseeable future. I don't see it as something that all of a sudden next year something's going to lift and the conversation's going to be any different.
Yeah, and I'm not saying to do it, and I'm not saying to not do it. I'm just saying we have to have an understanding of the process that we're embarking on.
Right.
You know, just like we see a miniaturized version of this just about every month in curriculum, when our district leaders who have embraced kind of the assignment to work with what you have, almost every single time something's come before us in curriculum, it's been a net zero proposal, because they've reallocated FTE or they've made a choice to you know, phase out one program in order to bring in another to kind of constantly evolve. So it's not the first time we've had this conversation. We've just been having on much smaller and much more frequent levels. But and I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying we just should have an understanding of exactly what it is that we're doing.
I think we all do, and I think that,
Yep.
yeah.
And we had this conversation earlier today.
So I think, I mean, and I will say it again, just because we're looking, but I feel like it's incumbent of us to perform the evaluation, and then, as a group, come to a consensus. Yeah? Okay. Anything else? I want to thank all of the team. Your work over the past months on this budget has been tremendous. We appreciate the diligence. We appreciate the patience with our questions. We look forward to our continued work next week. I hope everybody enjoys the holiday weekend. And with that, we are adjourned.